The roar of the crowd was deafening. Katsuki was still furious. It was a miracle that they managed to extract from him the promise to behave. That muzzle had only served to infuriate him even more. Todoroki remained silent on the second platform, as mute as Tokoimi on the third. It was tradition for the former to give a speech, but it had been an almost unanimous decision that Katsuki would say nothing, ever. So there he was, furious in silence as All Might surrounded him with a heavy weight. He didn't feel well. He thought it would be mild. His victory felt slight. In reality, it was hardly a victory. Was Zuko watching it? I hadn't written to him in days. Not even a quick good luck message. Not that Katsuki cared, of course. Zuko had his own life in America. It was strange that Zuko had gotten tickets and everything for him and Faye to come to Japan to see the festival in person, and yet they hadn't shown up. Maybe they got into trouble. They punished them a lot. An almost disturbing amount, and Hisashi's favorite excuse was to constantly take away their phones. The excuses for punishments were becoming more and more bizarre. Just last month, they were punished for falsifying IDs for skydiving, among other things. Where did they get the money? In fact, why couldn't they wait until after the festival? After all, they had spent a fortune on tickets. Hisashi didn't like to waste money. Would it have been very difficult for them to behave until the festival was over? The crowd was already unbearable. I wanted to get this over with and go. The presence of Todoroki to his right made his nerves stand on edge. It was reaching a crescendo. All Might said something, and then turned and waved to the camera. In another universe, Katsuki would be furious that All Might himself was presenting him with the first prize at his first UA Sports Festival. In this one, it was bitter, like a citrus peel pressed against the tongue. I hated him. It didn't seem right to him that All Might recognized him when Katsuki had refused to give his all. It didn't seem right to him. I wish someone else was handing out the awards. It was humiliating. In retrospect, Katsuki should have seen the signs that preceded the disaster. The way All Might lowered his head, speaking softly into his earpiece. The way he turned around in too much haste to hurry them out of the arena. The way Aizawa and Yamada disappeared from the commentary booth. The way Midnight appeared in the booth of 1A, just as Sekijiro appeared in the booth of 1B, looking a little hurried when he opened his mouth. I should have seen it, but he didn't see it. He was too absorbed in his rage to have any degree of awareness of the situation. A loud bang was heard, and electricity arced across the arena, filling a dome with pure strength as All Might vanished before his eyes. Katsuki was startled, wide-eyed and open-mouthed, his mind blank, because who the hell had kidnapped the true peace symbol? And then he realized, at the very moment that Todoroki and Tokoimi did, that he should worry less about All Might and more about the fact that there was a force field around the green that trapped them with approximately 30 mutant-type villains wearing gas masks, armed with some very puzzling-looking weapons, and two small, slender figures dressed in thin lower-face masks and hoods that looked worse from use. What the fuck? Crouch. Tokoimi howled just as a hail of bullets hit the platform, and the three of them threw themselves behind the concrete. Shit. Someone shouted in English with a thick American accent that was suspiciously familiar to me. Druid, stop the spores. We are not in the United States. Did the Americans just sneak into our sports festival? Asked Todoroki in a panic. It's very typical of the United States, Tokoimi said with wisdom and a stern expression, as if they hadn't been shot recently. Spores. Bakugu, you speak it fluently, what did they say? Todoroki asked, and Katsuki risked peeking around the edge of the platform. The little one. A little bigger, in fact, he just asked the other, called Druid, to stop the spores. They must be professionals. What kind of teleportation can take someone across the Pacific? That's ridiculous. Spores, no way. Why had Fagelin never mentioned a professional with a similar peculiarity? There seemed to be a lull in the fighting. The little ones were crouched down, and Katsuki watched them boldly to find out what they were working with. The older one wore a leather jacket, a large speaker on his belt, combat pants, and a hooded shirt underneath. There was a telltale bulge of body armor under his shirt, and his boots and leather jacket were painted with colorful graffiti. He wore fingerless gloves with steel knuckles that looked unpleasant to contact with someone's face. A lower mask covered him up to his eyes, and protective goggles were tightly fitted over any identifying features. The lower mask appeared to be made of a speaker. a peculiarity in the voice. Katsuki's gaze swept over the second figure. He was perhaps a few inches shorter than the other and was wearing a painted leather vest. Black combat pants with knee pads, black leather boots painted green, brown, and with cream swirls in the shape of mushrooms. A green sleeveless sweatshirt with thick black seams trimmed to hide the hair that identified him, like the others, and a lower face mask with a filter and protective glasses. Not an inch of skin was visible beyond his tanned, almost Middle Eastern forehead. He wore sleeves or a compression shirt over his skin, and gloves covered his hands. The mask stretched out under the sweatshirt, tight and black as night. He carried elbow pads and electric batons in his hands. A duo of heroes, he thought. The taller one was perhaps more showy, with bright colors painted on his leather jacket, but there were too many similarities in their costume designs to indicate anything else. Most of Katsuki's best friends were American, but he didn't know much about American heroes. For all his admiration for heroes, Izuku was surprisingly more interested in Japanese heroes. And Faye was another story. The calm was broken and another burst of bullets forced Katsuki to retreat. Shit, he cursed. We can't use our quirks, and neither can they. Why did you bring us here? The brown and green-skinned druid asked, and a maniacal laugh echoed through the air. My dear druid, I wanted an audience, and this is the largest I could get. A soft voice interjected, and Katsuki dared to look up. A thin man, presumably tall, floated in the air, cross-legged, his elbow resting on one knee and his chin resting on one hand. He smiled lazily at the duo of heroes, and for some reason, Katsuki felt a twinge of fear and rage in his back. This was wrong. This was very wrong. What the hell happened to the beefed-up security? A loud rumble could be heard outside, and Katsuki's head turned sharply to the left, where the image of All Might hitting the force field was seen. He was not moving. How thick was that damn artifact? Was it a shock absorber? What are they saying? Todoroki hissed quietly. I don't understand how they cannot hear anything in English with how loud Yamada is. Katsuki snapped, irritated. Druid. The brown and green asked why they were here, and the very floating bastard said he wanted an audience. There's a difference between hearing English in class and hearing it in the attack of a damn villain, Bakugo. Is it really time to behave like an imbecile? Todoroki snapped. It's Bakugo. That's when he's kind, that's when we panic, Tokoyami said dismissively. We have to figure out how to break this force field, Todoroki muttered. We cannot attack. There are cameras everywhere. Katsuki desperately wanted to say the cameras. He wanted to point out the guns that were pointed at them. He wanted to do something, but, contrary to popular belief, he had a survival instinct and a professional survival instinct. They couldn't do anything. Another rumble was heard, and the man tilted his head back and laughed, long and loud. Do you like it, All Might? He asked nonchalantly, this time in near-perfect Japanese. Do you hear me right? Apologies for stealing the cameras. I needed them. How do I speak Japanese? I practiced a lot in determining my goals. Hello, Japan. Did you have a good sports festival? I was a little worried. I've heard you had an explosive ending. Bakugo grunted quietly and shuddered. That was arguably the worst pun on a gift I'd ever heard, and he received many. The two heroes crouched down, ready to strike in the calm. I know what they're thinking. Oh no, another monologue villain. Don't they know that monologues are what kills villains? And they would be right. But from my point of view, I'm not a villain. No, I'm a revolutionary, and unfortunately for Mockingjay and Druid, I don't have a career at stake that would stop me from using my gift. The man purred and stretched, staying in the air and floating lazily. I'm the chess master, and my board is finally ready. Let's despair the hero's commission, guys. Give them a show. Gunshots rang out, and Katsuki ducked with a loud punch. Todoroki shuddered and erected a dome of ice around him. He's not attacking, Todoroki said as he saw Bakugo's piercing gaze at him. And we are at school. We can use our skills. Katsuki raised an eyebrow. I should have trusted my gut when he told me you were an expert at breaking the rules. It won't last forever, Tokoyami said. We need to find a way to help them. No peculiarities. We cannot sit here and ignore the banquet of darkness that looms outside this ice hut. Did you just call my construction a shack? Todoroki said expressionless just as the ice shook. We can always fight without peculiarities, But you too are. Katsuki fell silent with a grimace as he looked at Tokoyami. What? You're a mess in hand-to-hand combat, Katsuki said flatly. Both depend on their peculiarities. Does that hurt Dark Shadow's feelings? A little. Tell him he's an insecure bastard. Katsuki snapped just as the ice igloo shook again. A shower of fragments fell on them, and he broke. Oh, fuck this. Katsuki cursed and raised his arms. Sweat gushed out and then exploded, scattering ice everywhere, and he jumped up to watch the massacre. You could have asked. Todoroki snapped. Shut up. I'm still because you were a little. Katsuki fell silent, his eyes bulging at the chaotic scene in front of him. Mockingjay, the colorful one, was literally a blob of reds, blues, yellows, and blacks. Men flew left and right as he tore through their ranks like a raging parrot. It looked like I was dancing, and yes, I was really dancing. A touch gave way to a soft, powerful backhand just as Druid used his partner's shoulders to launch himself into the air, crashing into a colossus. His powerful thighs wrapped around the giant's neck, and a blow from the staff knocked him unconscious. Druid fell to the ground and glided smoothly across the torn grass, his staff whistling through the air to snap his kneecap with a resounding crack. Mockingjay punched another man in the face, and electricity arched from his knuckles. Wow. Support objects. How did he manage not to get electrocuted? They had no fingers. Their fighting styles were ridiculously opposed, and yet surprisingly compatible. Mockingjay fought like a cheater, fast and strong, with a fluidity between one move and the next. Druid, on the other hand, fought with absolute brutality. The crunch of bones filled the air, screams piercing through the cacophony as he lashed out at the villains with lethal precision. Katsuki watched with food bowl eyes as the hero grabbed a pistol by the barrel, gently dropped the magazine, ejected the remaining bullet, and smashed the Glock into his face. A quick turn disarmed him, and a forceful blow to the face left him lying on the ground. Do you need help? Asked Todoroki quietly. Probably not, Katsuki nodded weakly. But I'll do it anyway. Katsuki, stop, Tokoyami snapped, but Katsuki could no longer hear. He left the platform gently and joined the fray. Almost immediately, he was punched in the face as explosions began to flood the arena as All Might initiated a new lunge, similar to the one heard when he attacked the Nomo. A bright red filled the opposite end of the field. Wow, Endeavor was trying to be useful. That was new. It was better to evacuate the sand. He was going to burn it. A faint scream filled the air as the field right in front of him rippled with the strength of present mixed scream. They would wear him down. There had to be a way through. Katsuki ducked to dodge the next punch and punched him in the stomach, enough to take the guy's breath away and throw him over his shoulder. Gods, could you stay down, please? Snapped Druid as he sent a man screaming and flying across the field. A polytheistic American? Katsuki narrowed his eyes. Speakers, fungi, shorts, completely covered. Even American heroes were recognizable in their civilian clothes. And that voice, perfect Japanese, a slight tinge of an American accent, as if they had spoken to her at home. It was a very familiar voice, too. No, it was not possible. Katsuki shifted his stance to avoid a grab and broke through the man's defense to send him a tremendous uppercut. I think I can handle anything, motherfucker. Katsuki roared as Mockingjay sent a man into the force field. These guys weren't very well trained. They depended on their peculiarities of strength. That meant building on their momentum. A crackling electric baton arched over his head and slammed into a man's nose. Blood splattered Katsuki's face, and he blinked vaguely. Bullets flew through the air, and Mockingjay knocked Katsuki to the ground as the projectiles crashed into the force field. Get behind the platform, Mockingjay ordered, and another familiar voice was heard. Too familiar. His accent was even softer than Druid's. Oh, how funny. The floating bastard laughed in English. How long will it take for the commission to give you permission to use your quirks, duo of heroes? About 30 seconds, Druid shouted softly as a swaying stone house tossed Katsuki into the air. He landed with a sigh of pain as a telltale crack echoed through his ribcage. Shit. What do you want, Edward? You'll see, The imbecile shouted jokingly as Druid lunged forward and handed a clothesline to a speeding man toward Katsuki's unfortunate companions. The villain fell to the ground with a satisfying thud, and a kick to the face knocked him unconscious. That was going to need plastic surgery. The vision seemed to set Todoroki and Tokoyami in motion. The two parted ways, and Tokoyami slipped to Katsuki's side as he dealt with the pain spreading through his chest. "Are you okay?" asked Tokoyami quietly as the duo of heroes deftly pulled the remaining 26 villains away from the students. "I'm." "Then you're fine. I may surprise you, silly, but I'm crazy. I don't care if I'm okay or not." "So you broke your rib?" "Shut up," Katsuki growled and staggered to his feet. "If they still don't puncture your lung, they'll do it with a second hit," Tokoyami said. "Then make sure I don't get hit." "Fuck," Katsuki snapped, and Tokoyami blinked a couple of times. Was it a surprise? Katsuki was not an expert in bird facial expressions. "Are you the one working with someone?" "Shocked, then." "I'm literally in school to be a hero, you." "Of course I'm willing to work with people." Katsuki narrowed his eyes at the two heroes fighting. The heights, the costumes, the names, the voices. Tokoyami followed his gaze. "Do you know them?" he asked quietly. He probably asked if he knew their heroic identities, their peculiarities. "Better than not." "Fuck," Katsuki replied. "It was better than not, damn it." Izuku and Faye should be punished, in America, without lying to him for years with absurd excuses about the conditions of punishment. They had better not be them. He wasn't stupid. They were too young to be doing these things. Even with Hisashi's training since Izuku was 5 years old, he was not at all prepared for the work of a hero. And Faye had only been around for 5 years. I definitely didn't have the full training. How did Faye come about? Izuku only said that he came from an abusive home. Faye never talked about it, only saying that he was raised by a scientist. Scientists. They were scientists. America was weird. Present Mix screams died off just as another man lunged at them. Tokoyami, surprisingly, managed a pretty good throw, enough for both of them to move out of the way in a hurry. A particularly loud blow sent Druid across the field, crashing into the barrier with a ghastly crack. He stood up with difficulty, and only then did Katsuki notice how tired they looked. How long had they been fighting? His opponents looked fresh. Druid and Mockingjay seemed to have been fighting for at least an hour before being released to another continent. Dried blood stained Mockingjay's bright yellow speaker. How long had he been there? Was it even waterproof? Probably. The flames licking the force field increased in intensity, as if to compensate for the absence of present Mike. Was Endeavor already panicking? Did he even care that his son was trapped with villains on international television? Katsuki looked at Todoroki. He was paler than usual, deliberately avoiding looking at the flames that hung over them. They didn't seem to be making a dent yet. "Druid, are you okay?" Mockingjay asked in English. Was it just Katsuki, or did they both avoid looking at him? "I can continue efficiently," Druid replied, and Katsuki frowned. He better not know them, but that specific speech pattern, paused, lilting, and almost tender, was a little too much, family. Druid moved forward again. He had a cut on his forehead that was slowly but surely covered with a white substance that spread, like a mycelium. "You've got to be kidding," cursed Katsuki. "They'd better not lie." The two of them looked at it in time. His expressions were illegible behind his glasses and masks, but his body language was unmistakable. Guilty. Guilty as sin. Bakugu. Listeners. Present Mix's voice was distant, but audible enough. Pro-American heroes, Druid and Mockingjay, the Japan Heroes Commission has granted you emergency international licenses. UA students, you are authorized to use your gift of self-defense. We'll be moving forward soon. Mockingjay gave a shout of triumph and cut a line through the disturbed and torn earth. "Friday, baby, play I've just been paid," she yelled, and suddenly, it sounded a lot louder. The mask was then a loudspeaker. "Damn liars," shouted Katsuki. He couldn't even be glad that he had been given permission to send those bastards to hell. Those liars. Mockingjay ignored him and began to move to the beat of the music, and Katsuki threw himself into the air with explosions that made his calluses explode. "Prepare for chaos, you two," he yelled at Tokoyami and Todoroki as Dark Shadow came to life. "What?" shouted Todoroki as the ice cut a strip through the grass. I just got paid. Mockingjay's voice pierced through the chaos, and suddenly a shotgun fell into his hands. The rhythm stopped, the gun cocked, and a boom echoed through the air as a bag of beans shot out, exploding on impact against a chest in a flurry of paper yen. Todoroki blinked a couple of times. What? He repeated, more quietly this time. Take off those gas masks, you damn ones. Put them in his face. Katsuki howled. Adrenaline raced through his body, mitigating the pain, and unleashed a massive explosion right in a bastard's face. A backhand sent him flying across the field. I'm broke, but I'm having a great time. Mockingjay's voice was unmistakable, tenor, slightly rough, with a touch of sass as he shuffled across the field. That was Midoriya, the damned Izuku. Katsuki could recognize that voice, that peculiarity, even in his sleep. The reference to the Hunger Games should have given him a clue. We don't know where we're going, we go in, we go out. With a deft flick of the wrist, the shotgun spun on itself so that he could grab it and hit a villain's face with the butt. The shotgun spun back and cocked it gently, firing again just in rhythm. When the hell did Izuku become so accurate? The chorus died down, and he lazily made some movements. It was a spectacle. An electric glide knocked him out of reach of a flailing leg, and then Druid stepped out and used his predictable gift. A hand hit a man's chest, and Fagelin, it was the damn Fagelin, stepped aside so Izuku could fire another burst. The bean bag exploded into yen right in the man's face, while the mushrooms spreading across his chest could send out a cloud of spores that sank into his flesh. True, the airborne spores could not be dermatological, but the physical spores that sprouted from the fungi could. The man staggered, blinked hard, and fell on his face. Izuku and Fagelin were already at their best. Dark shadow shot out, tearing off his gas masks, and Katsuki caught one to put on his face. The men froze, struggling to break through the ice, and the cursed floater spoke, smiling warmly at the chaos that stretched beneath him. I think it's time to tell stories, he said as he soared even higher, too far out of Katsuki's reach. Katsuki cursed and unleashed a massive explosion on 3 villains, driving them away from Todoroki's back. He investigated. Wasn't the League of Villains bad enough? At least, apparently, these guys took the time to learn their gifts. You see, about 16 years ago, a privately held American company called Aegis, dedicated to genetic research, implemented a new program with specific characteristics. It was called 00. A pretty innocuous name, isn't it? One would think so. Katsuki knew deep down that he had to listen. I knew it. The program worked like this, Edward continued. That was its name. Different human DNA was spliced together to create the absolutely perfect human. To be more specific, the perfect bodyguard. They would have sold out for a lot. Perfect immune system, enhanced strength, IQ in the range of 200, enhanced senses, improved stamina, improved pain tolerance, all equipped with the perfect multifunctional peculiarities. Attack, defense, and regeneration, many of which were capable of filtering out any toxin or defeating any attack on the immune system. There were 9 test subjects, from 01 to 09. They had no name. You see, to scientists, they weren't people. After all, they didn't come from the womb. They came from a petri dish. But genetic testing wasn't enough. When they were born, if you can call them that, they were subjected to all kinds of tests and training, designed to optimize their quirks and eliminate any human emotion. Katsuki's eyes fell on Druid's glasses. He was hesitating. Another blow sent him flying, and he rolled to his feet, regaining his rhythm as Mockingjay turned up the volume. A hail of bullets hit him, and he fell backwards. Blood splattered blue and white ice, and Druid struggled to his feet. He had been hit. Horrible, isn't it? Edward continued lazily. I mean, regardless of their birth, they were still children, right? Scientists disagreed. So, when they found a defect, although it is not that autism can be considered a defect, they decided to exterminate them. 07 was 10 years old, right, Izuku? Mockingjay skipped a word. Another shotgun explosion. He couldn't stop singing, or he would lose his weapon, and the cat seemed to have Fagelin's tongue. Fagelin, practically Katsuki's brother in everything but blood. Don't fuck it, Katsuki whispered quietly. Don't listen to him, Faye. Where do you want to go? Asked Tokoyami. None of the gas masks were of any use to him. This was terrible. Fagelin couldn't unleash his spores. He wouldn't use his spores against a civilian, not in this kind of environment. But a scientist had a weak spot. He seized the right to eliminate 07 and help the little boy escape. Edward continued. Izuku Midoriya found it. The son of a professional, they did everything they could to get the 07s out. But it was too late, wasn't it? They eliminated the tests when they were both 11 years old. All the 07s were gone, right, Fagelin? Only little 07 remains. The one who has an impressive mushroom peculiarity that he can't even use because of little Tokoyami. Japanese people prefer surnames, right? How do those bullet holes go? I was kind. They can't shoot Izuku, but by now they've shot you about 50 times. Some are still in there, right? We've been struggling for a while, right? You must be reaching your limit. Enough, Fagelin muttered in English, and Katsuki collapsed. With a scream, he soared into the air, but he could not reach it. Weightlessness was a sensation he had grown accustomed to over the years, but he had never been so high. Shut up, Katsuki howled, and Edward laughed, sliding to the left. All Might was slowing down. This was bad. This was very bad. You must be wondering, Edward continued as Katsuki began to fall. Dark shadow shot forward and Katsuki slammed into him, rolled, fell to the ground, and a deep fear gripped his heart. How? Edward paused to take effect. Are these two professionals? I asked. The answer I dug up? The scientists escaped, and 07, now Fagelin, took matters into his own hands with his new brother. They became vigilantes. And they were caught. Izuku was facing a reform school, and Fagelin was facing something much worse. I was considering a new facility. For testing. Hisashi panicked, because this was his failure, and it was non-negotiable for Fagelin to be sent to a testing center as a guinea pig. So he reached an agreement. He would end vigilantism, train them to be heroes, send them to school, because they were good. Better than most professionals. Izuku has a great stage presence, right? Look at how rhythmic they are together. But the US government couldn't let Mockingjay and Druid disappear for a few years. No, they wanted them active. They couldn't let the world know that the best vigilantes were just children, putting the adults to shame, the people's favorites. If there was a public hearing, or if people started investigating his disappearance, they would find out. No, Mockingjay and Druid had to stay active. It was a great story. The US government, caving to the popularity of the #1 vigilante duo, gave the people what they wanted. Heroes who truly care, even if it means breaking the law to do the right thing. The rhythm of the catchy American song didn't fit the story. It was funny, but Izuku's voice sounded strained, drowned out by playful trumpets. Desperation took hold of Katsuki's insides. Why didn't they tell him? There could be. Well, he couldn't help, but he could have supported them, or something like that. They were child soldiers. Feast your eyes, world, on 2 marks of child soldiers, exclaimed Edward. See them in action. Did you think I chose UA for advertising? No, I'm just hitting the nail on the head. Do you think the tragedy of the Zeros would have happened in a world where children weren't pimps for public consumption? You know, I could have ignored the obstacle course. He could have ignored the cavalry battle. It's pure harmless fun. But the rigged tournament? Children struggling and bleeding for sport on international television? This is the Olympics, honey, and these kids are putting on a show. How desensitized are we to the commodification of children? Heroes are prepared from a young age. Do you think this bold duo could have come about if people weren't used to children being fed lies, stories of greatness? If people weren't used to the idea of children fighting and fighting for supremacy so they could resign themselves to a life of more battles and pain? Do you know how many children who start training at 15 die 5 years after going on stage as heroes? About 70%. And here we have Mockingjay and Druid, at 15 years old, occupying the 72nd place in the American Pro Hero rankings. 72nd. From more than 1,000 agencies. They don't even have their own agency. They are independent, looking for opportunities. The true American dream. The underdog, overcoming their criminal records and being men of the people. Amazing, right? Disgusting. Edward leaned forward as Fagelin charged forward, batons lit by electricity, while rising to Katsuki's throat as more bullets were injected into him. He kept fighting. He would not give up. Keep playing for the camera. How cute. I think I already understood. Feiglin fell. His gift was being used too much. The song was ending. Izuku was about to lose his gun. Katsuki lunged forward to stand on Feiglin's lying body, panting heavily. Izuku continued to put on a show. He tried his best. Katsuki felt bad. Why hadn't they told him? They could have told him. I wonder, if I told my guys to retire, would you also retire? I can see the conflict in their eyes. Don't blame society. Bad people who do bad things, you bastard, shouted Katsuki. People do whatever they want because that's what people do. You play the savior, but you do the same as them. Hurting children to prove your point. You hypocritical brain. Talking about people who hurt children because society told you it was okay, but society is literally everyone's opinion of society. That's how it works. People do whatever they want because everyone believes that this is how society works, so they believe that it needs to be changed. But none of them are 100% right. So now you, asshole, think society is fucked with children, so you have to be even more so. Do you think Faye wanted you to tell everyone her damn sad story? Do you think she wanted to that everyone knew? Do you think you're freeing him by filling him with bullets and hanging up his dirty laundry? Did you ask what the kids want? It sucks. You're not a revolutionary. You're attacking innocent children because you decided that the world didn't preserve their innocence enough. That's not revolutionary. Revolutionaries, I don't know, burn empty government buildings, leak classified documents and so on, and go after the adults they hold responsible. Write a fucking petition or something. Feiglin groaned weakly and tried to sit up. Another explosion was heard, the fire ignited, and a piece of the field collapsed. Edward cocked his head toward Katsuki, his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. I'll wait until you're 18 to kill you, he said weakly. Try it, motherfucker. I dare you, bastard from V for Vendetta. Izuku's song ended, and he flew through the arena with a frightful blow. Katsuki was panting loudly. Damn adults. None of them knew what the hell he was doing. He was sick of adults ruining his UA experience, and it had only happened to him twice. And now his brothers were lying bleeding on the grass. I am he. And that's my sign, Edward said cheerfully, and there was a bang. 3 students, 2 child soldiers, and a professional hero were left alone on the ruined lawn. Shoyuta couldn't see Nizu behind the giant stuffed lion, which looked like a cloud. He seemed comfortable. The man looked at his boss with narrowed eyes and decided that a terrible day awaited him if Nizu was already buying stuffed animals. Do I want to know? You'll know anyway. Take this, Nizu replied, and Shoyuta, hesitantly, took the stuffed lion, crushing it experimentally. Was it legal for something to be so soft? It didn't look like it. Small paws climbed up to her shoulder, and Nizu curled up and shook his scarf. Let's go to the hospital. Take me to my car, Nizu ordered, and Shoyuta sighed deeply. Do you know them, or something? Of course I do. They call me Grandpa, Nizu said dismissively, not even questioning who they were. Shoyuta already felt like his head was going to hurt. Don't you have a press conference? Not for 6 hours. Let's go? Are you already up to something? Please. As for Izuku and Feiglin, I've been conspiring for 5 years. The US government won't know what happened to them, Nizu replied confidently, and Shoyuta resigned himself to a long day. Did you know this would happen? If I had, it wouldn't have happened, Nizu said quietly. Shoyuta looked away. 2 attacks in less than a month. His students had been battered at best, but the damage inflicted on the sibling duo was horrendous. Feiglin's mysterious gift had been boosted to the max, and Izuku emerged with a punctured lung, a broken arm, a concussion, and severe internal bleeding. Recovery Girl had been cleared to operate on him, but given the nature of Feiglin's gift, the remaining bullets could not be removed until he came out of the overused coma. It was dangerous to leave them like this, Shoyuta knew better than anyone, but they needed Hisashi's authorization to even consider putting gift-suppressing handcuffs on him to operate on him. Children. They were children, and for some hellish reason they had not only been given heroes' licenses, but had been put in charge of a terrorism case. Or at least it seemed so. Shoyuta legitimately couldn't imagine any of his students lasting more than 6 months as professionals, and these 2 had been doing vigilante work for a year and 3 as professional heroes. What the hell was going on in America? They had always been extremely enthusiastic and morally dubious at best, downright evil in general, but this? Put teenagers on the front lines just to save face? They had barely reached adolescence. They were children. And Bakugo evidently knew them, which was another matter. How the hell did I know them? He had refused to leave the hospital since they were admitted. Shoyuta didn't even know what the children looked like. Then why did they call you grandfather? Oh yes, you weren't at school when I taught Hisashi. He's older than you. Nizu replied in a weak voice as he opened the modified Hummer and climbed into the front seat. Shoyuta climbed into the passenger seat and looked at the lion in his hands. Hisashi was in the foster care system when I met him, Nizu explained. I saw a certain cunning ingenuity that needed to be cultivated. When I met him, it was his first day at the UA, and he was already figuring out how to hack the security system. He did very well, by the way. It took him 3 days. No one has beaten their record yet. By the time his 3rd year arrived, I was taking him in, and he was my personal student. When Izuku turned 5, he was offered a position at an intelligence agency in the United States, so he packed up with his family and left. Inko, his wife, a lovely woman, by the way, prepares the best katsudon on the planet, was Bakugo Mitsuki's best friend as a child. That's how your young Bakugo meets them. They come to Japan very often. I taught Izuku 5 alphabets when he was 6 years old. He's very smart, you know. And that Feiglin? Shoyuta asked quietly as Nizu exited the parking lot. For the first time, he was respecting traffic rules. As Edward McGubb said, he appeared on the scene when he and Izuku were 10 years old. Izuku found him on the street, dragged him home, and that's where the Aegis case began, Nizu replied. I foresaw problems with Hisashi's 2nd child, so I started working on dual citizenship for Feiglin. When I was proven right, I implemented a plan to bring them to the AU. Actually, they were supposed to be in 1A, but this case happened and Nizu fell silent. Shoyuta looked at him. Were you going to put 2 traumatized pro-hero teenagers in my class? In my defense, Feiglin would have only been there part-time, and Izuku would have gone out 3 times a week to work with me. They both have exceptionally high IQs, and with Feiglin's autism added to their upbringing, he does not perform well in a classroom. When he works, he works. He can compartmentalize, but constant stimuli all the time are not conducive to learning. In missions, he spends most of his time in front of the computer and only comes out when he has calculated the fastest and most effective victory condition. It's a miracle that it's so popular. Add to that the fact that Bakugo gets angry at everyone for overwhelming him, and it would have been a disaster. Shoyuta remained silent as they stopped at a traffic light. And now what will you do? Both Feiglin and Izuku have dual citizenship. With them on Japanese soil, and with the current media circus, if I play my cards right, they will be granted political asylum. They may not be cleared of their crimes anytime soon, but as long as we can keep them out of America until all this is over, everything should be fine. It should happen pretty quickly. After all, this looks very bad for the US government. And if we succeed, UA's reputation will be saved by rescuing the Midoriya from the clutches of an institution that produces child soldiers. The only problem is that, when it is known, Hisashi will be in serious trouble and will not be able to leave the United States, which forces me to take them under my tutelage, which could seem like nepotism, especially since I am their father and grandfather. Not to mention the allegations of child abuse that are circulating out there. I didn't know you were a father, Shoyuta muttered as they turned down a side street. You don't even know what species I am, Nizu said. The hospital was nearby. A piercing gaze fell on Shoyuta, and he felt a kind of dread in his gut. No. You're one of the few teachers who is already a parent and has experience dealing with trauma. And what about Bakugo Mitsuki? She's her aunt, right? He can barely keep Bakugo's anger in check. I can barely control Bakugo's anger. You can't ask your employees to take care of your grandchildren to avoid an international scandal. Okay, I'll ask Tashinori. We're taking them. Nizu chuckled and turned on the flashing light as they prepared to enter the hospital parking lot. Tashinori is a perfectly responsible adult. He is missing his stomach and continues to refuse to follow his nutritionist's plan. The other day I saw him eating a cheeseburger and dipping the fries in a milkshake. If a dietitian told you to put down the jelly bags, would you do it? If my stomach is missing? Yes. Don't be so him. He has a lot of weight on his shoulders. All the more reason to be responsible, Shoyuta murmured grimly. hugging the stuffed animal tighter. Nizu pretended not to notice. Who is this for, by the way? Faglin, you sleep a little better when you have something soft to hold on to. Something in that statement brought a tear to Shuta's heart. He was silent as Nizu parked the car and stiffly stepped out. The heroes, by law, despised hospitals. The bravest, like her husband, frequently visited children in hospitals and participated in charity events. But as an underground hero, Shoyuta had little reason to do so. He still remembered waking up with Hisashi's face buried in his lap less than 2 weeks ago. It was never going to be something I would forget. Injuries were part of the job, but to think about children in the hospital, every time Shoyuta set foot in one, he felt like a failure. His casts had been removed immediately after the festival ended. I wasn't quite ready, I was still in pain, but with the attacks approaching, I couldn't stand the thought of being wrapped up and useless. At least she could hold a stuffed animal in the shape of a cat to comfort herself. He would have to ask Nizu where he got it. Hitoshi might like one, even if he complained that he was too old for them. Shoyuta often caught him snuggling up next to his stuffed present mic. Neither of them said a word about it. The doors opened as Nizu climbed onto his shoulder and checked them in at the counter. Something in white barrenness had dominated them both. The smell of cleaner hung in the air, and Shoyuta felt that familiar uneasiness settle in his gut. The elevator ride was silent. Nizu didn't bother to pretend. Shoyuta looked at him briefly, trying to imagine her son in the hospital, wrapped in a blanket and unconscious. I knew that sooner or later it would happen. It was inevitable in hero work. It still made him want to vomit. People believed that the only emotion Nizu was capable of was sadistic joy, but seeing it that way, Shoyuta knew it wasn't. Nizu may be genetically an animal, but he was just as human as the rest of them. Shoyuta gripped the stuffed animal tighter. The elevator doors swung open, and he walked carefully down the hallway. The door to the children's room was open. They had armed them. Evidently, izuku was a kind of security blanket for Faglin, and vice versa, which was not surprising. Voices could be heard in the hallway, and Shoyuta stopped just outside the door, out of sight. He and Nizu exchanged a glance, and silently decided to wait. I don't understand why they didn't tell me, Zuku, Bakuga said. He looked devastated. Had she been crying? His voice was hoarse. Why did he have to? Why did Faye have to look like this for her to find out? Why didn't you say anything, you bastard? There was a long, unpleasant pause, and Shoyuta was about to move, but a warning palm motioned for him to stop. They needed to have this conversation. Say something. Kaken I. A slight American accent. Young. Too young. And it wasn't Bakuga's voice at all. It was soft, sweet, with a slight gurgle. He had been crying too. It must have been Izuku. It's not that I didn't want to. We wanted to tell you every day, but I just... Fuck, Kaken. Fuck. You think. When you're a kid, you think that when you're an adult, everything will be great. No rules. No expectations. You can do whatever you want. You think you'll have the freedom to figure out who you are, what you want to do, but then you get there, and you realize that the only time you had to be yourself was when you were a kid, and you missed it all. There are more rules and more serious consequences. You have no say in anything. At least when you were a kid, you could refuse to eat broccoli, and you were just tricked into eating it later. When you're an adult, there are no tricks. They put the broccoli in your face, they put it down your throat. You have even less say in who you are, what you want to do. You're going to be whatever people tell you you are. Your work is a hero, and heroes don't share secrets. You can't change that. Your job is to be an adult, even if you still blush at the thought of having the talk you haven't had with your parents yet. You do what you're told, and it's horrible. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to say something. But when you're a hero, you can't complain. You can't cry. You made your bed, and you have to lie on it. You wanted to be someone who gave people peace, because I wanted to give Faye peace when adults couldn't, and Faye wanted to give me peace, because when he suffers, I suffer. They were his brothers, so they were mine too. But when you're going down a path where you're trying to give people peace, you don't realize until it's too late that you have to give up yours. I imagine this conversation in so many different ways, but... A sob shook the room, and Shoyuta pressed her lips tightly. That's not how it was supposed to be. That wasn't how it was supposed to be at all. Nizu squeezed his head slightly, but Shoyuta ignored him. There are so many songs I promised never to sing. Kaken, Izuku whispered hoarsely. I promised. songs that could kill in an instant. But 6 months ago, Aegis returned. They, they decided that the zeros, I hate that word so much, zero. They weren't zero, Kakin, they were somebody. They were people. They were not. They were not useless. They meant something. But they decided they were wrong in how they did it. There was too much free will. So they eliminated free will. They made them grow faster, stronger. They were perhaps a few months old, but they looked in their 20s. And his eyes, Kakin, there was nothing there. They were just walking body bags. And on the earpiece, when the heroes couldn't subdue them, they ordered me to eliminate them. And I couldn't say no. Only, I sang the lyrics, and they were nothing more than, they were dust. They were just dust floating in my nose. That could have been Faye, Kakin. That could have been our Faye. He just left. Dust. Because it's not human enough. Because they weren't human enough. Because they were born different, and they didn't matter. And I didn't say no. I should have said no. There should be. What kind of hero wouldn't? Doesn't he say no to something he knows is wrong? What kind of hero am I? And adults. The heroes. They didn't even look at me. They just let the police clean up the scene and said nothing. I wanted them to tell me it was okay to say no, and they didn't. Because orders are orders. How? A hiccup. He was sobbing. How pathetic. I didn't ask permission when I decided, at the age of 11, to get up and face Aegis. What did I need permission for then? How was I? How could I tell you that? Tell you that one day you will have to make that decision. Tell you that one day you will have to murder like me. Tell you that heroes lie when they say that what they do is honorable. Tell you that your dreams are just nothing more than that. Dreams, they are not real. Izuku. Izuku, take a deep breath. Bakugo said quietly. Stop crying. Fuck. Damn idiot. Come here. There were heartbreaking, painful sobs filtering down the hallway. Nizu's paw flexed slightly, and Shoyuta tightly squeezed the lion she was holding in her arms. That's not how it was supposed to work. Never, in all his years of heroism, had Shoyuta been ordered to kill anyone. Heroes were heroes, not covert operations. That was not how it worked. What the hell were people being taught in America? What was the requirement to graduate? Waterboarding? A shot in the head? What the hell was going on there? They were children. Did his superior on that mission even know that Izuku was fucking 14 years old when they ordered a boy to murder in cold blood? I don't know how fucked up it is in America, Zuku, but such things don't happen here, but Kugo muttered. The sobs were muffled. His shirt was probably soaked. The heroes are too well known to get away with it. Not even underground heroes can get away with it. Those things shouldn't happen, and it's not your fault. Yes, it is, Izuku said quietly. He was calming down. Not bad. This far exceeded Shuta's expectations. I sang the lyrics. And if you hadn't, they would have sent Faye to go through the same shit she came out of, until she went crazy, and then she would have left just like them. That's coercion or something. It's not your fault. After Bakugo's outburst on international television, Shoyuta had been reassured to know that he had made the right decision not to expel him for his explosive attitude. This only reaffirmed him. It was a small consolation. I felt like I shouldn't be there, that I shouldn't be listening to this, but I couldn't just leave. I needed to know. The sobs subsided, and Shoyuta felt a deep relief. This was going to require a lot of therapy, possibly with medication, but the first step was already taken. Izuku had told someone. He didn't even know the boy, but his paternal instinct was already awakened. What would it look like? Shoyuta wondered. No images had yet been released. At least, he would soon find out. Soon, the only sounds filling the hallway were the beeping of 2 heart monitors. Nizu patted his head, and Shoyuta entered the room. He was not prepared for the vision that awaited him. On a bed was Izuku. Her dark green hair was pulled back into a messy bun, with loose, curly strands all over. His green, bloodshot and swollen eyes fell on the 2 adults over Bakugo's shoulder, and the first thing Shoyuta thought was freckles. Lots of freckles. He had a small scar across his left eyebrow, and figures of Lichtenberg loomed over his fingers, tightened in Bakugo's shirt, probably from his support team's first test. Freckles danced up and down his bare arms, dotted with the scars of a child at work as an adult. He had a telltale gunshot wound just before his right elbow, and a few glass scars on his left forearm, as if he had been thrown out of a window. He was pale, probably too pale, but that could be due to the peculiarities of healing, given that he was not wearing a cast. In the other bed was Feiglin. Her long, soft brown hair was pulled back into a fishtail braid that fell over her shoulders and waist. Freckles adorned his cheeks, and his eyes were closed. Breath fogged the mask on his face, and Shuta's stomach churned at the sight of his tanned skin. She was covered in perfectly placed honeycomb scars, intersected with several scars likely accumulated during his work as a hero. The combs went up his neck, ending just before his jaw, down his bare arms, over his fingers. At some point, someone had laid him on his side. Thick eyelashes dotted his cheeks and thick, perfectly arched eyebrows cut his closed eyes. You pushed your quirks to the limit. Huh? The diapers must have come out of training. Grandpa, Izuku croaked, and Nizu carefully lowered himself to the ground. Hello, Izuku. Shoyuta, would you mind giving Feiglin her stuffed animal? Nizu asked softly, as if they hadn't just eavesdropped on what was possibly the worst case of child abuse Shoyuta had ever known in her career, and that was saying a lot, considering Hitoshi was her son. Is it Eraserhead? Izuku asked, his voice breaking, and Shoyuta raised an eyebrow as he slid across the floor to carefully place the stuffed animal in Feiglin's arms. The boy tensed up a little at the movement before bringing the lion to his chest. Shoyuta felt another stone in his stomach. Did you do your own research, or did Bakugo tell you about me? Asked Shoyuta. My own research, Izuku replied hoarsely. They like Japanese heroes. Wow. So perhaps there was a small hope that Shoyuta could gain his trust. The boy probably had worrying access to the dark web. Perhaps he didn't know that things worked differently in Japan. Shoyuta looked at him, not wanting to see his unconscious failure on the bed behind him. He wasn't sure he could reconcile that arrogant image he'd seen beyond the force field, projected on televisions of all nations, with the little boy in bed in front of him. When that song started, Shoyuta wanted to bang his head against the wall. It was a spectacle. Izuku knew how to handle the audience. The dance that matched perfectly with the fighting, the smooth transitions, the breakdowns on the bridges, the cavalier way he handled the shotgun, the way he fired the damn thing just to the beat, the explosion of brightly colored yen. When McGubb began to speak, Izuku barely hesitated, even as his life began to implode before his eyes. He continued with the show, even with his voice strained, even when the dance lost its joy. He stayed strong. Shoyuta knew a thing or two about the heroic show. All Might save people with a smile. Her own husband maintained that cheerful spirit, that arrogant frankness that attracted fans in droves around him. Children in love with his spirit, tact, and optimism. It seemed that Mockingjay had adopted a similar personality. The kind of hero who assured people that as long as you were happy, expressed yourself, and danced at your best even when chaos hit you, you were winning. Even if you were losing. Heroic deeds weren't just fun. Izuku clearly knew this better than anyone. Shoyuta became concerned when his age was revealed and tried to understand how Izuku was still alive. The revelations that Shoyuta was not supposed to hear shed some more light on the situation. Izuku knew the gravity of the situation. I knew it. But the question was, did he maintain that carefree and arrogant image out of necessity or out of compassion? Were they orders or their own choice? He was the favorite of the people. The fight hadn't revealed much about Druid. Shoyuta had to dig to find out why the more discreet and clearly brutal hadn't dropped Mockingjay in the rankings. Surprisingly, it wasn't their fight that clarified the situation. No, it was a compilation video of Druid interacting with various victims of violent crime and humanitarian aid. Specifically, an example of the aftermath of an earthquake in San Francisco about 3 months ago. Are you afraid? Asked Druid as he crouched in front of a frightened and crying child whose mother was still missing in the carnage. I do not know. Where's my mommy? The girl sobbed, and Druid tilted his head curiously before moving a little closer. That's pretty scary, if you want to know my opinion. If my mother had disappeared, I would be crying too. Druid dropped to the ground and rummaged through his special ER belt before pulling a small Mockingjay stuffed animal out of nowhere. He offered it to the girl, and she took it hesitantly. The air curled around his wrist, and then calmed down as he withdrew. I only have one permission. Do you promise not to say that I have favorites? I promise, he whispered as he pressed the Mockingjay stuffed animal to his chest. Druid crossed his legs and tilted his head curiously. And heroes don't cry, the girl murmured as she hugged little Mockingjay. Druid chuckled. I have a very big secret. Do you think you can keep it from me? The girl opened her eyes wide and nodded. Druid bent down knowingly to pretend to whisper in his ear, as close as he could, that he was about a foot away. I'm scared too. You're not, the girl protested. Of course I do, replied Druid. Do you know how many mothers I have to find today? Many. So many. All of them. It's my job. There is much to fear. What if I can't find your mom? Then you will be even more afraid. My job is to make sure you have nothing to fear. And it's even scarier because I know what it's like to be scared and alone. So I know what you're feeling right now. And it's scary for you to feel that way, because a hero's job is to care, and when you care about someone, you don't want them to be alone and scared. The girl's lower lip trembled, and she sat down on the dirty floor to approach Druid. But heroes are brave. You're supposed to be brave. Druid let out another soft, tinkling laugh and shook his head. But that is the secret of courage. You can't be brave unless you're afraid. To be brave is to do the right thing because you are afraid. If you're not afraid, there's nothing at stake, you know? So if you're afraid, and I'm afraid, then I'd say we beat them all in bravery. What do you think? The girl's lip trembled, and she wiped her watery eyes. But what's the right thing to do right now? Druid cocked his head again, and Shoyuta had the impression that he was smiling under his mask and glasses. And he was right, because when he spoke, I could feel it in his voice. Right now, the right thing to do is to help you get to all those tents that scare you. That's where everyone goes. The right thing to do is to go to your mom and the doctors to make sure you're okay. Because you're very, very small, and your only job is to be happy, to be healthy, to cry when you need to allow yourself to be afraid when you're scared, to be sad when you need it, and to ask for help when you need it. You don't have to do anything else. You just have to trust me. Can you be brave with me? The girl cried again and nodded several times. The air around him glowed, betraying his peculiarity, a small repellent force field. Druid held out a hand, and a small hand took it. The boy got up and lifted her carefully so that she could cry on his leather-covered shoulder. The camera turned off as they both turned and began to move away toward the setting sun looming over the rolling hills of San Francisco, the sea glistening in the distance. The last frame was already famous. It had gone viral while she was in a coma. The silhouette of the child soldier, helping another traumatized child, walking towards the sun falling on a disaster. The boy who didn't have anyone else to help him, so he decided he needed to be the person he needed when he was young. The video was only a few hours old, recorded by one of the parents of the children he had saved in an attack in New York 4 months earlier. The comments were a disaster. Some lamented the tragedy of the mid-areas. Some praised Druid. Some, well, the intolerant are always intolerant. Having been born autistic from a petri dish, it was inevitable. Sarcastic praise abounded about his so human for the camera's behavior, despite the fact that it had been proven several times that he was in fact unaware of half of the clips that were being recorded, including the one in San Francisco. It was interesting how the video came about. The father, a prominent conspiracy theorist and HeroTuber, had created a Facebook group called the Parental Druid Public Relations Unit, less than 5 minutes after the attack, asking parents, media, and hero hunters to share any videos of Druid interacting with victims that showed he was human. The same video that had caught Shuta's attention was going viral on its own, posted several times on virtually every site, circulating over and over again. Just 4 hours earlier, an article had been published in The Guardian that looked at the power of the final shot and why it evoked so much emotion. There weren't many openly autistic heroes. Shoyuta could count the Japanese on the fingers of one hand. I knew that Bakugo would be openly autistic when he debuted. Tsuyu was a mystery. Ida had spoken openly about her diagnosis on social media, so it had already been said. In fact, he liked to have a lot of autistic students this time. He was not well known, but his degree was a double degree in general and special education. I didn't usually use the special education aspect, but this time I had 3 autistic students, 2 dyslexics, and 1 with ADHD. I also suspected that Ishido skated discreetly with ADHD. He just hadn't had time to force her to get tested. Their mission for the next 3 years was to make sure that each and every one of them graduated. The existence of the compilation video had made Shoyuta feel a little less guilty. The conspiracy theorist, a man named Rhett Zelda, was drowning in guilt, according to his Twitter posts. His job was to detect these things. The man was infamous for taking down a popular American hero named James Gordon, a hero named Angel, for child abuse. Zelda's whole trick was to detect child abuse in heroes. And the same hero who had saved his own son, the only hero besides Mockingjay that he seemed to have good things to say about, had gone unnoticed. This was the biggest conspiracy of the decade, and he had failed to protect a child. Not just one, but two. Which led me to the second compilation video. Most of the videos of Mockingjay showed him fluttering, showing off, singing, and dancing without any worries. It made sense, of course. Izuku arguably surpassed Hisashi in sheer stage presence. He was good. It was fun. It made people feel like they could smile in the face of adversity. The children adored him. He had a certain quality of an older brother that made them feel that they could be silly, funny, unruly, and children without judgment or abrupt orders and tired of calming down and keeping their mouths shut. And that kind of energy was the perfect bait for clicks. People liked to see Mockingjay in his sauce. People liked the show. They enjoyed the rhythm, the movements, and the carefree attitude. It didn't make them feel safe in a world drowning in violence, per se. It made them feel that it didn't matter if their world was violent, because they would be fine anyway. As long as they had something to smile about, as long as there was someone out there singing their hearts out, the world would keep spinning and hopefully turning to something better. But Rhett wasn't interested in that. No, his video was about Izuku showing rare displays of emotions other than overflowing energy and stage presence. The man was a teacher, really. He had single-handedly taken the reins of the PR mess and made the kids look like kids, children in need of protection. The clip Shoyuta had in his sights was of a candid interview while Mockingjay was on patrol. Druid was off-screen, probably distracted by something, but there was Mockingjay with all his exuberant spirit. It was just after the 5th Boston Massacre. The heroes were exhausted and tired, and it showed in the slight fall of Mockingjay's shoulders. He was exhausted. As freelancers, the two had been exhausted, going from one agency to another for weeks, dealing with the shows of force. Mockingjay, as Shoyuta pointed out, had that presence that made people feel like the world would keep turning. And they needed that presence everywhere, in every city. His eyes were not visible, but if he wasn't wearing goggles, Shoyuta was under the impression that he wouldn't seem to have slept well since the preschool exploded with bullets and grenades. It was horrible what happened, and Druid and Mockingjay had been the first to respond. They shouldn't have been there, but no one was better with the children than the two of them, no matter how terrifying Druid was in combat. And anyway, the government didn't exactly care about their well-being. There were only 4 survivors, out of 30 children and 5 teachers. One girl had a quirk that allowed someone to touch her and disappear from sight, erasing all traces of her existence. People just didn't notice them. The 4 were in the punishment room when the shooting began. Druid was the one who found them and convinced them to come back into existence. He just sat in the punishment room and talked for 3 hours, according to sources. He put down the stimulation toys he was carrying with him and asked Mockingjay to sing for them. Apparently, Mockingjay cried when they returned. They had no idea if they were just talking to ghosts. And then they returned to the streets. They did their job. Had they consulted a therapist? The United States was even worse than Japan with its lax arms controls. They never learned their lesson. All the weapons involved in the crime had been obtained legally. Assault rifles, stun grenades, pistols, a shotgun. It had been horrible, a senseless act of violence. And the reporter had caught Mockingjay at the worst time. Or at best, Shoyuta wasn't sure. Mockingjay, they say, you were at the scene of the Boston bombing, the woman said. Mockingjay shuddered slightly. Yes, he confirmed quietly. I was the first responder. Is it true that your companion convinced the remaining 4 survivors to come out of hiding? Yes, it's true. It took 3 hours. He's good at rambling, Mockingjay replied as he quickened his pace. You know, the woman said slowly. The other day you asked on Twitter if enough children had died yet. Yes, Mockingjay confirmed. I think that reaffirms my stance on gun control, if that's your question. I wasn't really going to ask that, the woman said. Mockingjay looked at her cautiously. The camera moved slightly, as if the woman was mustering up the courage to speak. Actually, I was going to ask. You're almost always on the front lines. You see the worst of the worst. You're a new hero and have a criminal record, but you've risen the rankings at breakneck speeds. Most people think you're not looking for glory, but we don't know why you're here. You never talk about your motivations. So I guess I have to ask, is it worth it? See what you see, do what you do. Mockingjay was silent for a long time. His gloved hands slipped into the pockets of his jacket, and he threw his head back to look at the cloudy sky. It's going to rain, he said quietly. The camera focused to focus on what I saw. The gray, billowing clouds, laden with water that had not yet fallen. The woman was a good reporter. I knew I shouldn't push. You know, Mockingjay continued as the camera focused on him, focusing on his face as if the reporter wished she could read it. I'm actually Japanese. My family moved here when I was very young. Both Druid and I speak Japanese at home, eat Japanese food, buy Japanese clothes, have bentos for lunch. And yes, conspiracy madmen, we are brothers. I don't know why it was so important, but there you have it. But one thing I love about Japanese culture is the heroes. I love Japanese heroes. I love how different they are from American heroes. I'm very influenced by All Might and Present Mike. If you don't know Present Mike, you should. We both have vocal quirks. We both rely heavily on presentation and exuberance. Because sometimes it's not important for people to feel safe. Sometimes it's more important to make people feel like the world is going to keep turning, to make people feel like they have a friend. He was silent for a long time as they continued walking down the street. Druid appeared in the frame for an instant, and the camera focused on him to show him sprouting mushrooms in the park as he calmly explained to a group of children the importance of knowing whether a mushroom is poisonous or not, and then told them to return home before it rained. The young hero looked at the camera and waved briefly before continuing with his explanation. Mockingjay reappeared in the frame as he kicked a rock down the sidewalk. I think, interestingly, that my biggest influence is an old Disney movie. It's called Guardians of the Galaxy. The plot revolves around a group of criminals who save the galaxy because, and I quote, they are some of the idiots who live in it. At the end of the film, after a heartbreaking death, when it seems that all is lost, the protagonist saves the galaxy by distracting the villain with an improvised and quite funny dance battle. Shortly after my brother and I were caught, I rewatched the movie and remembered why I did it. Why did you become a vigilante? The woman pressed gently and Mockingjay, no. Izuku looked at Fagelin sending the group of children with their parents. No. Why I wanted to be someone's hero. And why is that? Izuku was silent, and Shoyuta noticed that he was drowning in his memories. Because his voice cracked a little, and he coughed in vain to hide it. Because it seemed like the world stopped spinning for an instant. And so saying, he hurried away, leaving the woman standing there with the camera while Druid joined him. The camera turned the volume down and caught the first drops of rain hitting the concrete, and the recording was cut off. Aizawa-sensei. Bakugu repeated, and Aizawa blinked. Nizu looked at him expectantly, and Shuta's gaze fell on Izuku. He smiled. It didn't look like a real smile. Aizawa's gaze fell on Fagelin, who was protectively encircling the lion Aizawa had just placed in his arms. He looked at Izuku again. What the hell had he signed up for? I didn't even know this guy. These guys. His world had simply stopped spinning. Once again, how many times would it stop? Yes? He asked sharply, as if he hadn't been thinking precisely about the videos of a conspiracy theorist. Principal Nizu just asked him if he had room for them. Have you written Blaze out yet, Nizu? Asked Shoyuta, and Nizu tilted her head. Considering that he has already been summoned for questioning, yes. They will probably try to frame him to keep him in the United States. I give it 24 hours, maximum. They might even try a grand jury. Humph, Shoyuta growled. We have a spare room. It might take us a while to get the shit out of the office, but we can put bunk beds or something. If it's long-term, you pay for the move, Grandpa. Of course I'll pay the bill. I'd rather introduce them to Hitoshi before moving them in. Why aren't we with you, Grandfather? Izuku asked. Politics, Nizu said. Nepotism, Shoyuta said at the same time. Izuku squinted at them for a second. I like you, he decided flatly, and Shoyuta blinked. Of course. Americans. They don't give a damn if you disrespect their family to their face. Being a cunning Nizu freak only upped the ante. Oh my god. I was going to have to deal with 2 Nizu spawns, and I hadn't even spoken to one. A suspicious look was directed at Feiglin. It may seem angelic now, but Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. Hitoshi was cunning at times, but overall he was a rather polite and resentful boy. Feiglin and Izuku knew how to handle Bakugo with skill. Were they going to corrupt his son? He didn't even know his parents. Wait, why the fuck don't we move his mother here? She will be busy preventing Hisashi from being sentenced to life imprisonment, Nizu replied. Aizawa narrowed her eyes. Lawyer. One of the best, Nizu hummed. And smarter than Hisashi. You told me it took him 3 days to hack into the UA's security system at age 15. Give it. Tashinori could handle the troubled children. And besides, Grandpa, why did Feiglin get a stuffed animal and I didn't? Izuku complained. He is not even conscious to enjoy it. Izuku, he's bigger than me. He could only carry one, Nizu noted. Do you have an IQ the size of the Eiffel Tower and can't figure out how to fix a problem the size of a stuffed animal? If you stop insulting my intelligence, I'll get you the Squishmallow present mic that comes out tomorrow, Nizu said, reassuring him, and Shoyuta blinked. How lazy. Yes, that's what they're called, Nizu said. They are one of Feiglin's favorite stimulation objects, in addition to their mouths. They have a perfect fabric texture, if you want to know my opinion. Hisashi didn't tell me anything about launching any Squishmallow. Hisashi's agency signs about 30 marketing contracts a month. I probably didn't even know. You should give one to Shinso. If I get one for Hitoshi, they won't be able to tell who's who, Shoyuta said flatly. You're bold to assume that I won't do graffiti on mine immediately, Izuku muttered, and Shoyuta glanced at him sideways again. Are we going to have a vandalism problem? He saw those boots. And that jacket. They were clearly hand-painted. Excuse me, I've been doing it mostly legally since I got my license. Mainly. Well, it's extremely difficult to get a license to make protest art against the government. It's much easier to get a different costume to paint. And there was the headache that I felt was coming. Nizu, we need to prepare for the press conference, Shoyuta said briefly. He was only going to say no to Izuku after he vomited anti-Endeavor art. Call it favoritism, but everyone has their vices. Of course, Nizu said and climbed back into Shuta's aching arms. He would have to put on a suit. Once again. A furtive glance was directed at Bakugo. Shoyuta would have to talk to him and the other two at some point. I knew Bakugo was in anger management therapy, but maybe regular therapy could help. I wasn't sure. I would have to look into it. However, Todoroki and Tokoyami would definitely go to therapy. To hell with Endeavor. Izuku, Shoyuta said suddenly, and Izuku looked up. There was an awkward pause as Shoyuta tried to find the words that escaped her. Red Zelda. When Feiglin wakes up, it might help. They needed to know that, despite everything, there were still adults on their side. Shit. He had to tell Hisashi. The police station was in chaos. With terrorists roaming freely everywhere, Sakachi was understandably exhausted. First the League of Villains. What a stupid name. And then, immediately after, these revolutionaries stormed the sports festival to cause an international scandal and cause a forest fire on social media. In fact, it wasn't even considered a wildfire. The whole planet was burning. It was out of control. Almost all the professionals had already been interviewed, and with so many consecutive incidents with the students, Sakachi had wisely convinced the boss to give the boys a few days to assimilate what had happened and gather their ideas before testifying. Tashinori had been a mess, just staring at his teacup. This time it wasn't their presence that caused the chaos, but they had been right there, right in front of them. The peace symbol could do a lot. He could, but there wasn't much to be done against the teleportation quirk. They barely had 30 seconds of warning before chaos broke out, and the boys had been stranded. Not much time had passed. In fact, only 10 minutes had passed, but the damage done in 10 minutes should never be underestimated. And it was a lot of damage. The press conference had not helped in the least. In fact, Sakachi was pretty sure that this conspiratorial rodent wanted to fan the flames. It had been a disaster. He was absolutely certain that Nizu had infiltrated that reporter who drew attention to the fact that the Hero Commission had taken over the security preparations following Nizu's failure. And then the revelation that he had been preparing to rob America's boys since they were 10 years old, that both were proud dual nationals, and that they would stay in Japan, to hell with the United States. Chaos. Absolute chaos. I felt sorry for Aizawa. Really, poor man. 2 attacks on his class, having to deal with traumatized child soldiers, seemingly related to the devil himself, not to mention the plethora of injuries he had sustained in the USJ. Thank goodness, Nizu had left him out of the conference. The man was demoralized and had no dealings with the press. And now people were digging up dirty laundry. The last time the Japanese media had been so excited about an American hero was when All Might was still in America. Those videos of that Zelda man that were circulating were, well, there was a lot of movement there. Aizawa had asked him for his honest opinion about them, and Sakachi was still thinking about his answer. Brilliant, honestly. Zelda was great. If he wasn't already a celebrity, he'd be an excellent PR agent. Somehow, he managed to highlight his humanity, his youth, his fears, his strengths, and his traumas in 32 minutes. And he also made them look like real heroes. He did not infantilize them. He made sure people knew they were good guys, and that made them good heroes. But he also made it very clear that what happened should never have happened. And it had an additional effect. The entire HeroTube community joined the debate about the use of children as weapons. Sakachi worked with many heroes and used to keep abreast of opinions. There were many discussions. Video of response after video of response. I was already watching a long friendship between 2 of the most popular Korean HeroTubers break down live. It was a disaster. People talked more about Red Zelda than they did about Edward McGubb. Sakachi couldn't help but wonder if it was intentional, taking control of the conversation and directing it toward a firmer middle ground that emphasized protecting children and not using them to convince anyone. Honestly, that man was a figure to be reckoned with. Sakachi would have to keep a closer eye on the American HeroTubers and to review their English. Hisashi had done a translation very carefully when he learned that his future adopted son idolized him. He cried. It had been pathetic, as always, but Hisashi was a good guy. The children were going to arrive soon. Given the nature of the attack, practices were canceled across the country, and the EU was no exception. Aizawa was quietly relieved. He was worried about the boy Ida. Sakachi was going to bet that another school would soon be attacked. Maybe not in Japan, but it was going to happen. If the AU could be corrupted, with the security of the Heroes Commission, what else could go wrong? That was probably the only advantage of this whole situation. The AU wasn't being criticized as much as it was during the USJ simply because it wasn't about the AU. It was all about the whole system, and now people were wondering if their own security was good enough. If your own students were safe enough. Sakachi needed a nap, but instead he was going through Zelda's latest video. He had been in the police station for more than 24 hours, and he was powered by sheer willpower, caffeine, and a 4-hour nap in a cell. After these interviews, he would go home, to hell with paperwork. He needed to collapse in a lump. Shoyuta and Hisashi had barely managed to empty the office. I had approximately 24 candid photos of a very Shoyuta in his messages, courtesy of Hisashi, which was pretty much the only bright spot in the last 72 hours. Hitoshi was due to meet with the Midoriya today, while Nizu and the parents took the children to get the essentials for the room: a bunk bed, 2 desks, and a large chest of drawers to share. Good thing the room was big enough to fit everything. That house was about to fill up. Sakachi could not imagine living with so many men. The detective sighed and rubbed his tired eyes before playing the video again. I didn't know why I was listening to that. It had nothing to do with the investigation. I just needed a breather, but I couldn't take my eyes off the incident. So, there it was again. Back to what was happening on the periphery. It was highly unlikely that he would ever meet an American celebrity, but he couldn't help but wish for it. Zelda brought up literally all the problems of the hero industry that Sakachi had been very aware of, without condemning the heroes as a whole. Few people could achieve it. With the influx of Japanese viewers, Zelda had hired a translator for the subtitles. It was a kind gesture. He was one of those hero-tubers who always made sure there were subtitles. They were Sakachi's favorites, given Hisashi's deafness. Sakachi only hoped that the text would be accurate. I would have to ask Hisashi later, when the children were settled. Then, Zelda began awkwardly. He looked a little. I don't normally interact with trolls. I let my work speak for itself. But today, with the mess I'm in, I'm invaded by a strange and palpitating need to say fuck it. Tired eyes watched Zelda's appearance. He looked as emaciated as Sakachi felt. He was a handsome man, at least. Tsukachi knew he wasn't ugly, but compared to Zelda, he was a bit disappointing. Blonde hair, neatly trimmed beard, green eyes, well-defined jawline, with gray hair sprinkled between shiny curls. He was aging gracefully. Tsukachi knew it was money, of course, and it was stupid to compare himself to a celebrity. Hell, most of his friends were famous. His best friend was All Might, for God's sake, though All Might looked worse from wear and tear today, even in his hero form. But even so, looking at him, Tsukachi couldn't help but feel a little inferior. The man had a daughter, for God's sake, and he was also a single father. It shouldn't look so good. It didn't look very good. In the past 72 hours, he had organized a Facebook group with detective skills that rivaled Tsukachi's, to the fury of outraged parents, bent on letting the world know that poor, traumatized kids were very good kids. He had posted 2 edited videos of 16 minutes each, thrown no fewer than 7 tantrums on Twitter, and apparently brushed up on some Japanese vocabulary, if his awkward thanks to his new fans were any indication. Definitely, that had not been done by an official translator. It was a disaster, but the essence was there. And that's not counting the number of checks he had to do to make sure the videos weren't fake. He must have been exhausted. He was wearing makeup, but Tsukachi had a knack for seeing through it. After all, most professionals wore makeup. Candid photos were a problem. Zelda cleared her throat. Well, I've been accused of several things. I want to set the record straight. The first accusation was that the US government paid me to make these videos. I'm not entirely sure why the US government would pay me to make videos that painted them in such a horrible way, but I assure you that they wouldn't. I didn't get paid for these videos. The ad revenue was unexpected and is being reserved in the meantime until the Facebook group can decide which charity we want to donate it to. Unless Mockingjay and Druid have miraculously seen these videos, which I doubt. But in that case, we will submit to their judgment. We will make a public donation with the full proceeds at that time. I really don't want to take advantage of this mess. It's a disaster. The second thing I've been accused of is that he paid me, the pro hero Nizu. I'm not sure where that came from. I mean, shit, guys, I'm a conspiracy theorist, but even that's overkill. Why the hell does Nizu mess with a conspiracy theorist hero-tuber known for taking down child molesters, especially being so involved in this case? I mean, I don't accuse Nizu of anything, but the person, in short. He doesn't know me, and with my history, I'm pretty sure he'd want to stay away from me. I could name 20 hero-tubers who are infinitely safer than me to get into. That they don't have a paranoid fan base that jumps on the slightest suspicion. Anyway, whatever. You are strange. I've never accepted money from pro heroes, and I never will, unless they want to pay me for a special appearance or something. Not because of something like that. They are children. Zelda rubbed her face with a tired hand and blinked bleary eyes. I wasn't going to comment on the next point. Not really. God, I'm so tired. I am sorry. But these comments are disgusting. They make me swear. I never swear. I know most of them are trolls. They're not my fans. But I can't. I'm human too. And I break. And this is the phrase. I'm not going to sit here ignoring the damn pile of burning shit underneath the Druid video. I don't give a damn how it was born. I don't give a damn if he's autistic. He is a person. He is the boy who saved my little girl's life. He gave her a stuffed animal of Mockingjay. Do you know? By the time he brought it to me, he was smiling. Do you know how much heart and humanity it takes to make a girl smile in the midst of a disaster? Sure, I'd been crying, I'd been scared, but when I saw my little girl after I was convinced she was dead out there, somewhere, she was hugging that boy and smiling. You know why? Because he also told her that he was autistic. Yes, Ariel is autistic and perfect. So this is personal. No, I never posted about it or mentioned it in my videos, because, as far as I could see, he didn't make it public, as he didn't do with many things. I believe that when a celebrity facilitates a platform that allows people to hurl insults, it is their duty to refute it. So, I'm going to say, to every autistic person who watches my videos, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry if you checked those comments and saw what you saw. I'm so sorry for every person who could have been born a different way, every victim of a peculiar marriage, every person who was told they weren't human enough, for seeing that shit in my video. I had my team delete the comments as soon as they appeared, but we weren't quick enough, and I didn't want to turn off comments and hide messages of support. We are still working on them. And this is a long shot, but I've already gone viral, So chances are you've seen it. But Druid and Mockingjay, I am very sorry that I failed them. The adults failed them. I am very sorry that this has happened to you. Everything. I am very sorry that you have to go through this. They are children. They are children. They should have been children. Yes, the vigilante is wrong, but I can't imagine being in that position, being pushed to the point where they were. They should have received help. Therapy. A support structure. There's the vigilante because you want to be in the news, and then there's the vigilante because the heroes couldn't save their family from being massacred and they couldn't bring the culprits to justice. Fuck. I'm very, very sorry. They were in Boston. Boston. And they knew it. They knew. How much shit did you go through that we don't know? What have you seen? What did they make you do? I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. But I'm also very grateful for everything you've done. Thank you, Mockingjay, for reminding us that the world keeps turning. Your only job now is to make sure your world keeps turning with you. Please, just keep your world spinning. We can handle it from here. Thank you, Druid, for teaching us that no matter what, the most important thing is to remember to be compassionate, no matter what you've been through, and to remind ourselves that we're all still human. America didn't deserve you. I hope Japan treats you better. Don't go back. Not until we've made up for it. We made this government. This was our fault. Zelda sniffed through her nose and rubbed her eyes. It was affecting him a lot. It was personal. He had a son, an autistic son. Their job was to expose these kinds of scandals. Tsukachi felt the guilt all over his body and almost wanted to shout at him that it's not his job to know everything going on behind the scenes. It's your job to report on what you do know, on what you can connect, and on what you can hypothesize. If he had nothing to rely on, it wasn't his fault. It didn't help that he tied Feiglin to the only bright light in probably the most traumatic time of his life. Tsukachi had no children. I didn't have the time, or even the means, to have one. If I had a partner, maybe, but I only worked long hours. His gift was invaluable. He was constantly requested all over Japan. So I really couldn't imagine what Zelda would be feeling. But seeing a grown man wiping his eyes on HeroTube, I could assume it. After all, I had seen him many times. And each time it made it feel personal. That was what made him a good policeman. He took it personally, but managed to distance himself enough to avoid a mental breakdown. By the skin of her teeth, sometimes, but she distanced herself enough. Tsukachi closed the count and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He was exhausted. I wanted to sleep. Coffee. Never before had Aizawa sounded like an angel. Yes, please. Tsukachi murmured and held out his hand. Aizawa placed the cup firmly on him, and Tsukachi took a grateful sip, moaning as the hot liquid slid down his throat. Are the children here? Asked Tsukachi and stood up, stretching. Yes, the 5 are in the lobby. Will your winner be a problem? Complained Tsukachi as he tightened his tie. Probably, Aizawa admitted sadly. Just don't treat him like a child, and he probably won't get angry. Don't ask meaningless questions. Half the mandatory questions are useless. Tsukachi muttered wearily and drank the rest of his coffee in one fell swoop. Aizawa waited patiently for him to finish before answering. Then good luck. My students aren't very talkative, thankfully, but I have no idea what to expect from the Midoriyas. I haven't even been able to talk to Feiglin. I told them not to avoid questions if they were classified, just to tell you they were, but I'm not sure if that will stick. American professionals and police officers don't usually have good relationships, so they may be too used to not being able to say they can't talk about something. If you are caught trying to evade a question, remind them. Although, realistically, since they are technically being granted asylum, nothing is classified anymore, and everything related to their background has been confirmed by Nizu, so they will probably only have trouble talking about the events leading up to the festival. I guess intelligence is working with your US team, but they don't come up with anything, Tsukachi said as he entered the lobby. It seems that they don't care that it's an international event at this point. So I'm supposed to try to get information out of the kids, but... Aizawa hummed. I understood. It was a disaster. His asylum was not conditional on his cooperation with the investigation, as Japan did not yet have strained relations with the United States. Although it was a vague statement. Any country was just one negative email away from having strained relations with the United States, and if the men's team continued to refuse to cooperate. The two of them entered the lobby, and there were the boys. Tsukachi's gaze swept over the five boys slumped in their chairs. Todoroki Shudo had been the center of attention since he was a child, and he stood out with his candy cane-colored hair. Tokoyami Fumikage sat beside him, staring at a coral-pink table lamp as his fingers deftly pressed the buttons. At least someone was entertained. Todoroki, meanwhile, kept his eyes fixed on the ground. His cheeks were red, and his detective gaze caught the problem as soon as Todoroki looked up at Midoriya Izuku before looking again, as if he was scared. Tsukachi looked at Aizawa, who pursed her lips briefly. Yes, he noticed. Across the hall sat Bakugo Katsuki, among the Midoriya brothers. Bakugo had also been the center of attention since he was a child. His mother was a model, after all. He didn't post many photos of him as a child, but there were enough for an avid fashionista to distinguish him from the crowd. The sports festival had catapulted them onto a much bigger stage. Absent-mindedly, Tsukachi wondered how they were coping. It was a natural thing for Bakugo and Todoroki, but Tokoyami? Maybe not. The accumulated traumas probably didn't help. Sure, they had managed pretty well fighting for their lives on international television, but still. Anyway, they weren't really the goals. They were just there to make their point clear. The burden fell on the professionals. The professionals who were completely engrossed in their phones. Izuku and Feiglin were dressed casually. Izuku wore a bright yellow bowling shirt over tight, ripped black jeans, wore cherry red Doc Martens, and set the nervous pace with one foot on the ground. It was out of place with her green hair pulled back into something that looked like a bun. It was horribly out of place, but Izuku didn't give a damn. Tsukachi had already interviewed UA students about the USJ incident, but the Midoriya were anyone's guess. I needed to analyze them with a critical eye. Feiglin seemed to care even less about her appearance than Izuku did. He wore a kind of leather cord around his neck, fastened between his teeth, and his button-down shirt seemed to be composed only of muted and unflattering colors. Tight, ripped jeans over maroon fishnet stockings and matching cherry red sunglasses completed the look, and Tsukachi struggled to determine if it was really fashionable or not. It must have been typical of the United States. Aizawa had already informed him about the scars, and although they were horrible, Feiglin seemed to wear them comfortably as she chewed on the small leather eyelash. They didn't bother him. Tsukachi had an expert eye for detecting when someone was uncomfortable with themselves, and Feiglin was completely relaxed. I was used to being in police stations. Tsukachi could almost imagine them as a pair of savage criminals. He wasn't far off, after all. They started out as criminals. So, comfortable, relaxed. Their life was falling apart, but this was just another day for them. Either they could barely stand or they thought, this could happen. With that, Tsukachi could work. He would talk to the students first, and then to the brothers. Tokoyami was a quiet boy. A little weird, but calm. But he was the one who had the least experience with this type of mischief. He would go first. Tokoyami Fumikage, Tsukachi called, and the young man looked up. Let's go. Feiglin was still chewing. Izuku, relaxed in his chair, looked at the office curiously, as if he were used to interrogation rooms, but without making any sudden movements. They were both quite relaxed. Nizu had evidently warned Aizawa that they were used to being interrogated together, as Izuku was more skilled than most at keeping Feiglin on track, and with his licenses, Tsukachi was willing to break the rules a bit. I'm going to ask you some questions. They may seem useless, but they are just a procedure. I must clarify from the beginning that I have a gift called Lie Detector. It's a passive gift, and I'll be able to tell if you're lying or not, Tsukachi said. The tape recorder rolled on the table. Why aren't we in an interrogation room? Feiglin asked suddenly as the pill fell out of his mouth. Do you need to be in an interrogation room? Asked Tsukachi with a raised eyebrow, and Feiglin narrowed at him. Shall we do it? No. Does your gift affect you? Cried Izuku, and Tsukachi realized late that his eyes were shining. Oh no, a fan of gifts. Why would it have to work with me? I know when I'm lying. But what if you have amnesia and have been told lies about you so that you repeat them? It would be a pretty simple way to avoid brainwashing, Feiglin reflected weakly. Tsukachi squinted at him for a moment. That was good. No. Not bad. Anyway, I'm going to start with a few simple questions. They're called Midoriya Izuku and Midoriya Feiglin, right? Yes, they replied in unison. Truth. Half a truth. True. 07. He marked it as true. Dealing with identity crises didn't fit into her job description. I'll call them by their names to make it easier. Is that okay with you? Yes. They replied in unison once more. The truth. The truth. Izuku, you're the Mockingjay, the American pro hero, right? Yes. Truth. Fagelin, you're the American professional druid, aren't you? Yes. Truth. And they're both 15 years old. Yes. In unison. Once again. Truth. Truth. That's great. Can you explain the events leading up to the attack on the sports festival? Yes, but it won't work. Izuku replied nonchalantly as Fagelin put the pill back in his mouth. True. Why don't you tell me anyway? They were professionals. If it was useless, it was useless. I still needed it in writing. Well, Faye and I were on loan to Grandiose Agency in Manhattan. He had sent us both on patrol about 12 o'clock in the morning. Normally we are not in the cemetery, so we were quite tired, but right now it is short of personnel because of the shipwreck. Almost all of his companions were in search and rescue. In fact, that's why we skipped the sports festival. We were supposed to be in Japan. Anyway, around 5 o'clock in the morning or so, we got a report of gunfire in Hell's Kitchen, which is pretty normal in Hell's Kitchen, but all the pros avoid that area, so we decided to go there even though it was out of our way. We find a scene of Daredevil fighting about 15 criminals in a warehouse full of unidentified drugs. We tried to ask for reinforcements, but communication went out. We thought someone was just trying to cover their escape, so we tried to make a pincer movement. When there were about 5 of us left, reinforcements arrived, and that's when we realized it was a trap. We were going to look for Daredevil and get out of there to get reinforcements, but they seemed to predict that move and shot him. We couldn't move it fast enough to escape. More men began to arrive, and that's when Edward McGubb appeared. We had been informed about him as a possible smuggler, whose affiliations we did not know. Until that moment, it was believed that he was smuggling illegal military weapons. We didn't realize he wasn't selling it. He didn't talk much, he just observed. We had been fighting for about 40 minutes when he called someone and told them it was time to leave. And from there, the sports festival began. The truth resonated. Fagelin was still silent, chewing contentedly on his leather tablet as he drummed his fingers at a steady pace on his tight knees. His golden eyes drifted. Fagelin, can you confirm that? Sukachi asked softly, and her eyes returned to him. Izuku is wrong. Daredevil was shot 3 times. But yes, that's true. He replied softly, and his gaze wandered again. Is Daredevil okay? We don't see him much, but if he knows he's going to see us, he always invites me to a boba tea. I like him very much. Once he told me that my heart is very slow. Truth, 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 truth. Sukachi forgot how annoying it was to hear multiple facts one after another. He blinked a couple of times and then dismissed it. What a sweet child. From what I've heard, that's fine. They reported on it. Obviously it is. Upset. Sukachi replied cautiously. Fagelin blinked at him. Why? Sukachi blinked again. He knew that Fagelin had a high IQ and that he was very good with children, but that people were angry for him was clearly beyond him. You'd have to ask him, or check their Twitter. There was a lot of buzz on Twitter. Matt Murdock had evidently lost his mind in spectacular fashion. Oh, of course. Twitter. I should tell them I'm alive, Fagelin said weakly as his gaze wandered again. I don't understand why everyone is so upset about this. There are many adult heroes with much more mental damage than we do. No one is bothered by them. Sukachi, very late, realized that he had only seen Fagelin interacting with children on camera. She hadn't realized that he was like that. Don't you understand why they're angry with you? Or why they're only angry with you? I had seen the video from San Francisco. It was inevitable. He valued children very much, so he could surely see that he was a boy. Oh, it seems that I expressed myself badly. Yes, it confuses me that they are only upset about us. There are only 2 of us, but there are thousands of professional heroes whose mental health is constantly deteriorating. Suicide rates are at an all-time high, and no one is talking about it. Sukachi blinked a couple of times as Izuku sighed. Because they made informed decisions. Bagel. There were 12 of us. Donut. Oh, even so. They should worry about them too, Fagelin said with a distant air as he continued to chew on the pill. Sukachi came up with an idea. Well, There are funds for that. They're just not well known. But there's a HeroTube celebrity, Red Zelda, who just asked you if you want to choose an organization to donate the proceeds from the compilation videos he made of you. Sakachi said carefully. They could contact him if they want people to talk. But I don't think I have any more questions for you. Aizawa should be back with Hitoshi soon. It was a fairly simple operation, as Tsukachi suspected. The American team probably didn't have much information either. That's why they were getting so difficult. In reality, leadership and cooperation they were very lacking. He was glad it didn't look like a conspiracy he could understand. If the US government approved it, it would open another Pandora's box that it didn't want to get into. Although I had to consider all the options. Who would benefit from exposing the Midoriya? They were going to fire people. For the time being, the United States did not demand the return of its criminals. It would probably only make everything worse if they did. But how was Feiglin going to influence everything? Tsukachi would not be surprised if a man in a suit declared it American property. This was a disaster. Realistically, in the United States, juvenile vigilantism was a misdemeanor, simply because underage vigilantes generally did not do great. If the United States demanded his return, it would be like demanding the return of a young man caught smoking marijuana. It wouldn't look good. Not at all. Worrying about such things was far above his level, but Aizawa was his friend. And I was taking these guys in. He was going to get attached. He always did. Tsukachi didn't like her getting involved in international politics. Until now, it was only known that the boys were under the tutelage of the UA. In theory, they simply belonged in the school. No one knew they were with a specific professional, but deception was necessary. Aizawa was an underground hero. It was imperative that he stay out of the spotlight, and this was a scandal of epic proportions. Tsukachi hoped this wouldn't backfire. Perhaps they should have turned to Tashinori, but that would only have targeted them even more. On the other hand, Yamada was among the 100 most outstanding heroes, and no one even knew that he was married to Aizawa. There would be no problem. Everything was going to be fine. All this would calm down in a week, as long as they were not targeted again. And it was unlikely that they were. No one even knew what they looked like. When they appeared in public, they would wear their hero's uniform again, and so they would continue until they were 18 for safety. Everything was going to be fine. Feiglin was delighted. Aizawa had bought him a boba tea, and right now he was in heaven. I didn't even know that boba was even more popular in Japan. It was everywhere. The texture of the pearls was pleasing to him. He liked to spin them around in his mouth, bite into them, delight in the way the pulp separated from the tapioca. Why the man insisted on paying was something Feiglin didn't understand. Sure, most of their hero pay went towards savings, but they had money. Grandpa had paid for most of the furniture. They were scheduled to be delivered later. It didn't matter. I had a new laptop and more squishmallows than I knew what to do. For new ones, to be exact. The ones I had bought. Apparently, his house in the United States was now a crime scene, so it would be a while before he got his old collection back. The lion's name was Ibn Battuta. He hadn't decided on the names of the others yet, but he was leaning toward Grace O'Malley for the unicorn. Hisashi had insisted on taking them to thrift stores when he realized that his fashion choices were questionable to say the least, and Feiglin's new shirts were garish. The pants were all new, of course, but he had bought some skater skirts, so he was quite happy. Their father had managed to get the shoes shipped to them the next day, which was an advantage, and his druid outfit was fixed. Aizawa had taken his costumes. Izuku had his headphones on. He was editing his fight list. Feiglin pretended not to realize that he had deleted, "I just got my payment." Feiglin was used to being the center of attention. Apparently, none of this should bother you. It was another day, and sooner or later it would be known. But even so, he couldn't help but feel some unease. As if they had exposed it. His disguise had protected him, allowed him to do what he had to do. He wanted the world to know what the government had done, for Izuku's sake. Feiglin was born to do what he did. Age didn't matter. It was what I was made for. But Izuku did not. Feiglin should never have told him about the other Zeros. Izuku always had a knack for wild machinations. Combined with his utter lack of survival instinct, trusting him was a recipe for disaster. But Feiglin didn't like to admit it, but he was hurt. And Izuku was his new brother. You told your brothers things. You didn't keep secrets. There was a secret pact between the Zeros. No secrets. They always had a way of communicating. even when they were inevitably apart. They always supported each other, even if things were classified, even if they did things they weren't supposed to talk about. You always told him about it. Fagelin had arrived too late, over and over again, and now everyone knew it was too late. It was too late to stop Aegis from creating the nulls. It was too late to stop Izuku from saving him. It was too late to save the Zeros. Aegis was disbanded. Almost all the trainers and scientists were behind bars. That didn't make things better. And now everyone knew that he was always a little late to save people. Izuku was a civilian. He should never have gotten involved. Fagelin never considered himself a civilian. He was useless, a tool. It wasn't made to be protected. He was born to hurt. It was made to be used. That was his designation. Izuku was not. At least it had already come out, but how long would that last? Fagelin no longer had his contacts. If things went to hell, I couldn't get them new identities or new faces. He couldn't make them disappear. They didn't even have any money hidden. His savings were in the United States. They had a small allowance and money from their new adoptive parents, but I needed a mailbox. I needed an information broker. They needed to have the options he had meticulously prepared in the United States. It was fine. The world kept turning. I was always going to keep turning. I just needed to start from scratch. Aizawa said something. He was rambling. The mall was too noisy, too exposed. Fagelin had already chosen 17 places where a sniper could eliminate them. The older hero had wisely placed a clear escape route near them. Maybe his brain worked like Fagelin's. The purple-haired man stared at him. Fagelin didn't care. He looked at him a lot, too, but something about the intensity of the purple puzzled him. Grandpa was not there. He had sent them with his credit card. Right now, it wouldn't be nice to see him with him. Yamada was not there either. That reduced the chances of being identified in the crowd. There were only the 3 boys and the adoptive father. Fagelin hoped Dad was okay. "Fagelin, are you okay?" asked Aizawa, and Fagelin blinked. "There are 17 optimal sniper positions in this position," Fagelin said calmly. "And there's a lot of noise. I don't like it." The purple-haired man was still staring at him. Shinso Hitoshi. True. He was Aizawa's real son. They were going to be brothers. Fagelin should talk to him more, but he was too loud. "I like boba tea, though," Fagelin added. Aizawa looked at him strangely. Fagelin needed to reassure him. "Thank you. It's worth the noise. And the snipers." "Faye, no one's going to shoot us," Izuku said with a sigh, and Fagelin wrinkled her nose. "There's always the possibility of an improvised attack." "Faye, please." "The chances of a sniper in a crowded food court in Japan are really low," Fagelin, Aizawa said sharply. "Here most only use their peculiarities. Anyway, now that I have your attention, here are some basic rules. They have been granted provisional licenses. Their emergency licenses were revoked because of their age, but with the disaster, they thought they would need to defend themselves in an emergency and have a good enough record to not sit for the exam. They will not do professional hero work until graduation, nor will they participate in sports festivals unless we determine that there is a low risk factor. It's not that it's very fair to the other students, but it doesn't matter. Nizu has compiled lists of reliable hero agencies to contact directly for internships, so they can get the most out of their school experience. I'll keep their hero costumes locked up with the rest of the class, and they'll only be able to access for practices and school events. No vigilante work, no professional heroes work. Their job is to be kids and respect adults. Got it? Nothing vigilante? Nothing heroic? Fagelin looked at Aizawa suspiciously. I didn't trust. Since the hero course doesn't do them much good, at least for now, they'll work as class assistants. Officially, they are in the 1A, but Fagelin will spend most of his time with Nizu, as he has no classroom experience. Izuku, you'll be in class a little longer, but you'll also be with Nizu 3 times a week. Their schedules are very personalized, but Fagelin, I must make one thing clear. You have permission to leave class at any time, for any reason, but especially if you feel overwhelmed. You don't need explanations. You can get up and go. All the other teachers are aware of your needs. Got it? Fagelin blinked a few times. Yes, I have things that. I got it. Aizawa looked at him once more with narrowed eyes, and then nodded. That's great. Let's go home. Bring your bags. Izuku looked at Fagelin as he scooped up the plethora of squishmallows to his chest. You would have to set up your new laptop. It was going to take hours. Faye, Izuku said quietly as Hitoshi gathered his bags, as quiet as ever. He was processing the information. Fagelin too. Yes. Fagelin responded weakly, and the softest of touches brushed against her skin. This time it will be different. Promise me you won't go. Prepare security measures, okay? We can't ruin it. Fagelin looked at him as Aizawa made her way to the exit. But we need them. We don't need them. Not this time. In Japan, it is different. I agree. Here we are going to be normal. Fagelin looked down at her scarred arms that wrapped the oversized stuffed animal securely. Maybe so, he muttered weakly. I had seen the comments. He knew what people were saying. I would never be normal again. Faye, please, Izuku said quietly, looking at him with those soulful green eyes that Fagelin could never refuse. I can't let you get in trouble. He only trusts his grandfather. I agree. It's not that different from you, is it? It probably already has everything you were going to do. Fagelin's eyes locked onto the lines of the tile. Perfect. Not a single scribble in sight. For now, until things calm down, he promised quietly. If I think we need them after everything calms down, I'll do it anyway. Just try. That's all I ask. I'm going to try. Guys, Aizawa shouted, and Fagelin looked up. Let's go? A fresh start, huh? Of all the mortal things in the universe, Fagelin knew that hope was the deadliest. Putting aside his reservations, Fagelin ran after Aizawa, weighed down by bags. Yamada had already taken home most of the clothes from his shopping trip. This outing with Aizawa was purely for pleasure, so that he would be introduced to Hitoshi, whom Fagelin was still unsure about. He didn't interact much with people his age. The only person he was usually with was Izuku, and now he would have to live with someone his age. He didn't seem too critical. Fagelin knew it, just cautiously. He was a recommended student, which was obviously important. 2 students in his class had dropped out after the USJ attack. Evidently, everyone was still recovering, and now they had the added stress of the addition of the Midoriya to their class. Fagelin wasn't sure how they would react. The brothers would have a few days to adjust, but then they had thrown them away. Fagelin and Izuku were advanced for their age. Fagelin had been homeschooled since his parents took him in. They tried to access a regular education for a month, and it was a disaster. After the arrest, Izuku also began homeschooling. It was just easier that way, considering how often their lives were uprooted, the time they spent on planes, the sacrifices they made to avoid going to prison. Or, worse, in the case of Fagelin. So their education was tailor-made for them, and they were both incredibly intelligent. Sure, Izuku wasn't as smart as Fagelin, but he had other advantages. After all, he was more popular for a reason. For Fagelin, work was work. For Izuku, an opportunity. Fagelin was going to miss Fiona. She was a wonderful tutor, knowing when to give him breaks and how to talk to him when he had sensory overload. He could never afford a break in public, so he had them in private, and with the preparation, they were much worse than they should be. Fiona was perfect. He always smelled good. He didn't give him fake smiles because he knew they didn't make sense, and with his vocal quirk, he knew how to make his voice sound just the right pitch for him to concentrate. Grandpa smelled good too, and although he didn't have any vocal quirks, his voice wasn't annoying. Aizawa also had a rather pleasant voice, although Yamada spoke a little loudly. Hitoshi had barely spoken, but his voice was soft and deep. Strangely deep for a 15-year-old, but it didn't matter. Izuku mentioned that he had heard that Shinso had a vocal quirk, so maybe it was that. Fagelin stuffed the stuffed animals in the trunk of the car and slid into the back seat. For some reason, Izuku had taken the passenger seat, and from the look he gave Fagelin in the rearview mirror, it was intentional. He had managed to talk to Hitoshi a little, but Fagelin hadn't said anything but hello yet. He was nervous, and Izuku knew it, so I forced him to interact. Abrupt. Hitoshi was looking out the window. Aizawa had the radio on, tuned to Yamada's station. Obviously, I was listening to her. Her husband. His other adoptive father wasn't there at the time, but his host, a partner from his agency, was pretty good. Fagelin looked at the laptop box in her lap. He shuddered slightly before looking back at Hitoshi. The boy was still silent. Fagelin looked down before running her finger over the cardboard seam. "You're nervous," Hitoshi said finally, quietly. Fagelin nodded silently as Aizawa's red eyes drifted to the rearview mirror. The house, evidently, was not far from the shopping center. They had not yet seen her. Yamada had probably already ordered the delivery men to install the furniture. Hitoshi looked back at the passing cars as Fagelin counted the streets in his head, called them by name, and memorized them. I would be, too, Hitoshi said quietly. Fagelin traced the seams again. I lasted a month at the last school I went to, Fagelin said suddenly. When you're wearing the costume, people treat you differently. When they can't see. The bag at her feet contained so many hair accessories that she didn't know what to do with them. Butterfly darts, shiny scrunchies, rainbow pins, bow pins, pastel headbands. Anything that made him feel like he was still covered. She didn't have her usual makeup, but her grandfather had told her that she was free to let off steam at the cosmetics store. I missed her limited edition pastel eyeshadow palette. He was almost done, and now he had to get used to the new Japanese brands. I wish the samples were enough. Perhaps Izuku would let him put on makeup to calm down. Aizawa had been given several points for not blinking by spending 52,000 yen on makeup. He knew his grandfather didn't care. It wasn't much. The makeup was expensive. I had only gotten one eyeshadow palette. It was large, with a fairly wide selection of colors. He still missed his boudoir. 20 palettes, some almost unused. I wish they would send them to him soon. Hitoshi was looking at him now. Do you like makeup? He asked awkwardly, and Fagelin nodded. I like to be colorful. I've only used eyeliner, Hitoshi said hesitantly, and Fagelin nodded. I started with a lipstick. And a base. A base? Hitoshi repeated. Yes. Primer. Base. Eyebrows. False eyelashes. Concealer. Fixing powders. Blush. Highlighter. Outline. Fixing spray. The base. Fagelin recited her description without any concern, and Shinso blinked. Did you start with all that? I skipped the highlighter and the outline. I have good bone structure. You too. You don't like to do things by halves, do you? Asked Hitoshi with a tiny smile. I prefer to operate with as much information as possible, Fagelin replied quietly. Maybe Hitoshi would let him put on makeup. She could put makeup on her eyes with a blue and silver tone. First, he needed to set up his laptop. Perhaps I could wait. Hitoshi looked out the window again as they entered the outskirts. The houses passed quickly. Fagelin remembered all the apartments for temporary rent, the rooms of the agencies that colleagues could not approach to preserve their anonymity. The house in Ohio they rarely returned to, where Mom made katsudon and traveled around Cincinnati looking for a good omakase restaurant. This time it was supposed to be more permanent. A mattress he could get used to. A home that could make it smell the way it wanted. Soft blankets that you wouldn't have to carry around the country. Sheets that wouldn't cause him pain. Plush toys that I would always find when I returned home. Makeup that you wouldn't have to choose what to pack. And when they will finish, I wouldn't have to travel far. You could stay home most of the time. Stay in Japan. Do your job. Coming home with soft lighting that wouldn't make her head hurt. The air conditioning just right so her ears wouldn't ring. And clothes that wouldn't make her hair stand on end. It was too good to be true. Fagelin kept running her fingers through the seams of the cardboard. Hitoshi looked at him as Yamada's voice filtered through the speakers, launching an enthusiastic announcement. Aizawa had the music down. Soon there would be a break. We're almost there, Hitoshi said awkwardly, and Fagelin moved, his eyes darting to the trees that lined the streets. Good. Good. They fell silent again as Aizawa turned into the street and stopped in the driveway. It was a rather nondescript house, in the Western style. The high walls hid her from prying eyes, and the door was open. You like cats, don't you? Hitoshi asked, and Fagelin looked at him. I've never owned a pet, but stray cats like me used to flock to him. In fact, Fagelin had saved many over the years, drawing from his savings to pay for veterinary care. It was one of the few times Dad let him touch the money. Another unknown thing about Druid. His mind went back to Red Zelda. Izuku had shown him all 3 videos. Fagelin didn't know how to react. I wanted to thank you. He thought it would be appropriate. The comments didn't bother him that much, but he knew they would upset autistic children. People were cruel, especially Americans. Americans were born with a title in being imbeciles, as Kakin said. Not that Kakin was one of the talkers. Fagelin knew how to behave towards people who did not bear the surname Midoriya. Even Izuku Kakin was quite mean to him. He was just really nice to Fagelin, probably because he didn't know what else to do with him. To be fair, Fagelin didn't know what to do with Fagelin either. Good, Aizawa said suddenly. Toshi can accompany them to their room. Hisashi is preparing dinner, so they have an hour to put away the clothes and turn on the lights. Fagelin, leave your laptop set up for tomorrow or after dinner. So do you, Izuku. You need at least a good night's rest, and if Niza taught you about computers. Aizawa fell silent with a grimace, and Fagelin cocked his head. It wouldn't take all night. Yes, of course. Wait until tomorrow, okay? Faye is very fast, Izuku said, and Aizawa sighed. Yes, it's okay. The four of them got out of the car, and Fagelin received her new stuffed animals. Ibn Battuta was already there. The bunk bed had high railings, so all his squishmallows could fit. And there was a saucer chair, a sky blue. So if something didn't fit, I could put it on the chair. Izuku wouldn't mind. He cared more about a good gaming chair. They all received a present Mike's stuffed animal. Hitoshi went to complain that he was too old, but for some reason he went silent when he saw Fagelin standing there, drowning in things. That was good. You were never too old for stuffed animals. Even Mom and Dad had some. Stuffed animals were important. Aizawa opened the door and the teenagers poured in. Fagelin immediately looked for escape routes. The walls could be easily cleared, but they were high enough that you couldn't see through the wide windows on the first floor. A window was open on the second floor, probably Fagelin's room, for ventilation, and the curtains fluttered in the breeze. Transparent and opaque. Not bad. That was acceptable. They had views of the river and the cherry trees. That was nice. Mustafa was not an entirely pleasant city, but Fagelin had seen worse urban jungles. It was confusing enough to sneak past someone, which was good. Your uniforms are waiting for you upstairs, Aizawa said as he opened the front door. Make sure they fit properly. If you need them adjusted, let us know before the weekend. Go back to school next week. Bakugo should come tomorrow. Shinso, try not to pick a fight. Only if it doesn't, Hitoshi muttered grimly as he entered. Fagelin ignored him. Of course, Kaken would be looking for a fight. It smelled of garlic, ginger, and soy sauce. Fagelin blinked for a moment as she felt the sound of music on her face. Yamada sang. With no little trepidation, he entered the house. The first thing I thought was cats. Two were curled up on the back of a couch, and a third at the top of an impressive cat tree. A black cat, a Siamese, and a brindle cat from the Norwegian forest, in that same order. The forest cat stared at the new occupants with its tail wagging, and Fagelin set out to avoid it unless someone approached. Hitoshi slammed the door shut with his hips, and Fagelin put the stuffed animals down on the couch as he looked around. There were a lot of pictures on the wall. There was a young Hitoshi dressed as Eraserhead, about 10 years old, a selfie of young Yamada, and an unenthusiastic and very tanned Aizawa on the beach, pressed against her husband. Hitoshi on the couch, about 12, with the three cats huddled around him. Present Mike, Eraserhead, the woman, was at midnight? Another hero with some kind of armor, and a fourth unknown hero with strange blue hair and a bomber jacket. They looked like high school students. Maybe they were in the same class. There was a piano in front of the window, with a guitar resting next to it. Fagelin didn't even have to look at Izuku to know that he was looking forward to playing the strings. For some reason, I didn't want to mention a visit to a music store. That's Fuku over there, Hitoshi said, gesturing to the black cat. He's a cuddly. It will try to kill you while you sleep. I hope you can breathe with a weight on your chest. Eri is the Siamese. He likes pets. He won't try to kill you. Sora is the up there. A complete cocoon. If he likes you, he'll attack your feet while you're trying to walk and completely tear you apart. If not, it will simply ignore you. It will also try to kill you while you sleep. Hitoshi. Language, Aizawa said softly as Fagelin peered into the kitchen. There was Yamada, his hair pulled back in a bun, with so much loose hair that it seemed to stand up, with flour on his t-shirt and threadbare sweatpants. There was a bunch of chicken bones on the side, and he was cutting the meat into small pieces. Oh, I was doing carriage. Mom did good carriage. Would yours be so good? Yamada looked over his shoulder, and his face lit up. You're back, he exclaimed, and Fagelin instinctively backed away. Yamada seemed to notice, so she went straight to her husband to kiss him firmly and stain Aizawa's gray sweater with flour. Honey, Aizawa murmured, why can't you open a bag of flour without making a mess of it? Clutter is part of the fun, Yamada insisted, and Fagelin relaxed a little. What do you think of carriage, guys? "We love carriage," said Izuku instantly. His big eyes lit up. Fagelin relaxed a little. Americans always make fried chicken too greasy, unless they're Southerners. Miss Star taught us how to do it right, but most of them screw it up. "Do you like to cook?" Yamada asked as Fagelin looked at the window screens. That was a problem. "Yes. We move around a lot and limit ourselves to specific foods, so we don't like going to restaurants when we're in different agencies. Faye makes a great lasagna." Yamada's face twitched. Fagelin wasn't good at reading faces. "Well, at least you two give me an excuse to practice a little Western cooking." "We can cook," Fagelin said immediately. He felt the tick on his face again. "Why don't you go fix your rooms?" Aizawa said. Yamada's mouth, about to say something, slammed shut. "Sure," said Fagelin and picked up his bags. "Did you remember to buy a curling iron and a hairdryer?" "Probably not. Perhaps they would have one of the two." I knew Present Mike. That hairstyle was a lot of work. Fagelin expected him to put on hair masks. The gel. He shuddered at the thought. She put on nothing but non-aerosol hairspray, leave-in conditioner, dry shampoo, and heat protectant. And, of course, deep conditioning treatments. She would have to wash her hair tonight. It was greasy. Hospitalizations used to cause that. Hitoshi led them to his room in silence, and Fagelin tilted her head towards him. "Are they good parents?" he asked impulsively. "Bagel, you can't just ask that," Izuku interrupted. Fagelin ignored him. It was a fair question. Hitoshi stared at him for a moment, his hand suspended over the doorknob. Fagelin studied body language. He wasn't one to look at social cues, so he had to know the dictionary definitions of certain positions. After all, his job depended on interacting with people. Both he and Izuku were heroes of everything. Action, rescue, underground, recovery. They did everything. So I had to be able to understand. Even if it was a clinical understanding. He couldn't pick up on details like Yamada's facial tics. The tones were alien to him, because they were different for each person, but the body language was generally the same for everyone. And Hitoshi tensed at the question. It would have been much easier if they had been able to go to their grandfather. Politics was a bummer, really, and had no place in heroic deeds. But from his grandfather's teachings, he knew his place in the industry perfectly. If they had gone to their grandfather, especially with the allegations of child abuse circulating, given that their grandfather knew about their situation, it would have been a disaster. More than it already was. Fagelin kept looking at Hitoshi, trying to figure out why he was so hard to read, why the question was wrong. Hitoshi's gaze locked on Fagelin's face, as if searching for the answer to a question he longed for. He seemed to find it, and the tension dissipated just a little. "The best," he said, and opened the door. "They probably need space. I'll be downstairs with Dad and Dad." And then he left. Fagelin glanced at the room he would inhabit for the next few years, trying to get an idea. It had the dresser and desks they had chosen. The bunk beds were made of metal, and the one above had a fairly high railing. That was good. Nizu had given them a list of the types of mattresses they should choose. With temperature modulation, memory foam, neither too soft nor too firm. They were empty, and the suitcases were lying on the floor with the decorations and clothes. Closer inspection revealed 8 sets of UA uniforms on either side of the closet, separated into 4. Fagelin tested the fabric of those closest to him, satisfied with the texture. They would do, even if he hated collared shirts. He would manage. "We should start," Izuku said quietly, and Fagelin finally turned his attention to his brother. The chaos hadn't been Fagelin, but he adapted well. Crises could wait for intimacy. But Izuku was an expressive person who had never been able to control his emotions well. They wouldn't be able to see Mom or Dad for years. Maybe not until they graduated. What if they could never return to the United States? What if Mom and Dad couldn't return to Japan? It was then that Fagelin realized the gravity of his situation. Mom and Dad had been his parents for 5 years. And now he was stuck with his new parents for about the same amount of time. And for Izuku, it had been even longer. Fagelin understood enough to understand that parents should not be changed. That only happened in the case of death or abuse. And Mom and Dad hadn't abused them. They had done what they could to save them, and they hated every second of it. Their actions were born of necessity, of survival. They had sacrificed much to keep Fagelin out of another quiet, white, cold place. They hadn't had to. Only when Feiglin sat down to think about the implications of his actions did he decide that yes, he had parents. After all, Dad was Blaze. He was one of the most important heroes. Perhaps not the best of the best. In fact, the duo had a higher rank than hers. He pretended to be angry when they got over him, but they knew the truth. He was proud and sad. But, with his position, he could have kept Izuku out of the reformatory. He could have kept his record clean. He could have made sure he got into a good school of heroes. But that only depended on him allowing them to eliminate the inhuman criminal that was 07. 07 had had a chance, and Feiglin had ruined it. He had considered Feiglin, in every inch of his being, the son he considered Izuku. He was his father, because Feiglin was his son. And now he was gone, because Druid and Mockingjay had failed to escape an obvious trap. Because they had failed, and now he was caught up in a manslaughter case that Mom was fighting viciously. They couldn't try him for a child abuse case, simply because of the amount of unearthed evidence the subpoenas would get. But a wrongful death? That is what they could do. If he was in Japan, there was very little they could do to get the brothers back. Right now, with two minors who were not in the hands of their real legal parents, there was some room for maneuver. If Mom and Dad managed to make it to Japan, the responsibility would slip away from them entirely. All this because Feiglin's amazing situational perception failed him once. All this for 3 shots. All this because they were trying to be heroes, although they no longer remembered why they were doing it. Could Feiglin be a hero now that he didn't have to protect or support Izuku under crushing pressure? Did he want to be? Feiglin's gaze drifted to her brother, who was already going through the bags to get out his horrible t-shirts. He had found one that said bowling shirt. Feiglin hoped he wouldn't be able to get joke t-shirts in Japan, but apparently the bad sense of humor was international. Izuku, Feiglin asked quietly, with a slight tremor in his voice. Izuku looked up when he noticed that telltale tremor. Yes. Feiglin looked at the bundles of hangers, the knee-length, A-line mushroom dress she'd found at an incredibly adorable Lolita shop in a corner of the mall. His hands ran over the dull print as he searched for the words. I would have to adapt it so that it would not be affected by the breast. Do you still want to be a hero? Izuku paused for a second, staring at Feiglin. Feiglin kept her eyes fixed on the large mushrooms patterned on the bottom of the dress, the huge buttons, and the Peter Pan collar. He could probably do it with the docks. Why do you ask? Izuku asked hoarsely, and Feiglin swallowed. Because no one has asked us yet. That was all. That was what Feiglin was worried about. The expectation was still there, although the treatment was kinder. They didn't seem free yet. Izuku reached out, gently took the dress, and held it against Feiglin's shoulders. It will look nice on you, he said. You have to adjust the top, but it's a simple fix. Anyway, we have to go to the tailor. Maybe a natural look? You could style your hair with those Viking braids you like. Izuku, Feiglin said in a warning tone as Izuku slipped a hanger under his neck and undid the top buttons so he could wrestle with the piece of plastic. Izuku paused. I was going to cry. Mom and Dad cried a lot. Dad cried 2 days in a row the first time Feiglin hugged him. He cried for 3 days when Feiglin called him Dad. As a kid, I wanted to be like All Might. He wanted to save people with a smile, just like him. I wanted people to feel safe, just by looking at me, knowing that I was there to protect them, Izuku said, her voice breaking. Feiglin braced himself. And then you arrived. And I couldn't make you feel safe. I don't think you feel safe very often, and neither do I. I haven't felt safe in years, except when we were actually home. With Mom, Dad, and Fiona. When we did homework, we either had some free time to go to aquariums the way you like it, or visiting gardens, or going to quiet open mics in small coffee shops. When we were kids. And with you, I realized that I couldn't make people feel safe. If All Might came to save the day, if he came to rescue us, I wouldn't feel safe. Because if I learned anything, it's that it's not always villains who can take down a hero. Not even All Might can do anything against a paperwork and a resentful suit man. So I think you made me realize that it wasn't important to make people feel safe. It was important. Make them feel like they could get up and move on. Because the world is not safe. And it's not. It is not right to sell the illusion that it is. I still love All Might. Really. He is everyone's hero. Because statistically the world of the majority is safer than ours. But we are not all of us. We have each other. You and me against the world. I still want to save the world with a smile, but people don't have to see that smile. They don't have to see the lie with me. They just have to know that they can continue." Feiglin was silent. Izuku was going to burst into tears. I could see the twinkle in his eyes, that telltale tremor in his voice. "But that doesn't answer the question," Feiglin said quietly. There it was. Tears began to flow and fall, and Feiglin opened her arms hesitantly. Izuku was there instantly, warm, solid, real, and still alive. They were still alive. The world kept turning. I don't." Izuku sobbed, and Feiglin rocked silently. "I knew that." He knew what to do when people cried. It was evident in his face. He knew what to do. "Only, I think if I still have a reason, it means I want to do it, right? Does it mean I still want to be?" He was about to cry and Feiglin let him hug him, as always. He knew what to do. Being a hero was never an option for Feiglin. He was good at it. But Izuku had a theme. Izuku had a reason. The world keeps turning. That was Mockingjay. What was Druid? Was I feeling lonely, and I don't want you to be too? It was a bit insignificant in comparison. All great heroes had a theme. They had a reason. Feiglin's reason was that everything had been taken from them, because they weren't human enough, because they didn't matter enough, because they were tools. Feiglin's reason wasn't, "My brother's world stopped spinning, and I made it spin again." Feiglin's reason was, "My brothers and sisters died, and it was useless, and I couldn't make it matter." Because they didn't matter. They were cremated, their ashes were thrown away, because they had no names that people wanted to put on a tombstone. Even after all, they still didn't matter. Feiglin didn't have a reason. Izuku made people's world turn again. Feiglin had never made his brothers matter. They mattered only to him, to Izuku, and to Mom and Dad. They mattered only to Dr. Bissett. No one else cared. If he had no reason, did he want to be a hero? Feiglin didn't know it. All he knew was that he needed to let Izuku cry, reminding us that we are still human. Did he really do it? "Hello, kid." Hitoshi looked at his father. It was her first day back to school after the attack. They had arrived early to avoid the inevitable media circus and had taken the back entrance. Dad had been silent for most of the walk. Dad had gone on his own, as always, dressed in civilian clothes. He used to arrive at school and open the door an hour before everyone else. It was evident that they were both up to something and were nervous about leaving the Midoriya alone at home. In Hitoshi's opinion, it was foolish to be nervous. Both were clearly too self-sufficient. Hitoshi stayed home alone the whole time. Izuku and Feiglin would be fine. "What's wrong?" Dad grimaced as he tapped the cement to open the hidden door. The two of them went inside, and it closed with a thud behind them. "Invite some of your classmates," Dad said suddenly, and there he was. Hitoshi should have known that he and Dad were plotting, the conspiratorial manipulators. "Are you trying to make it easier for them to go back to school, or use them as an excuse to force me to make friends?" asked Hitoshi coldly. Dad gave him his legendary look of hatred with red eyes, to which Hitoshi responded with a withering look. Two could play that game. They should have asked Dad to ask. You need to make friends, and problem kids need to be comfortable with someone other than Bakugo. If they hold on to him, he will drive them all away, even the friends he is miraculously managing to make despite his personality from the depths of hell. That was true. Hitoshi was good at manipulating people. He had to be, because he wanted to be a hero with his peculiarity. But, by being able to manipulate people, he was able to see the hidden aspects of their personalities that were exposed and begging to be exploited. And Bakugo? Stupidly overprotective. Hitoshi had left as soon as he set foot in his house. The brothers still couldn't go out, so they couldn't go see their uncles, which meant that the Izayamada family had to deal with the Midoriya's attack dog. The first thing he'd done was inspect all his clothes, his room, the sound of the damn air conditioner to make sure everything was in order and not likely to blow Feiglin up. And then he had refused to let Izuku out of his line of sight for 3 hours straight. No one went to the kitchen alone. Hitoshi had watched the show from the couch. Bakugo lurked, and he glared at them. But above all he lurked. They all went down together. They all went up together. Bakugo was scared. Hitoshi understood this, in general. The three had been raised practically as brothers on opposite continents. From what he saw, they chatted by video at least 4 times a week, except for the isolation conditions of the brothers. Messages were written daily. They called once a day. They watched digital movie releases together and postponed releases so that no one was left out. Hitoshi didn't even know that you could use Discord to stream Chrome, so you could watch Netflix with someone on the other side of the world. Even with distance, they were inseparable. And with the secret coming to light, trauma, understanding abuse, Hitoshi expected Bakugo to become enraged and refuse to talk to the Midoriya, but Izuku had evidently told him something that had. Well, Hitoshi wasn't sure what he had told him, but the way Bakugo looked at him was not good. Bakugo treated him as if he were made of glass, in his own way, as if it would break if Bakugo hit it wrong. Yes, if they didn't meet anyone before, they would stick with Bakugo, and when he told them to fuck off, they had little reason to dissuade him. If they showed the slightest discomfort, which they did, no matter how hard they tried to convince him to behave like a person, they would not succeed in calming him down. They needed to feel comfortable with someone other than Hitoshi, because Hitoshi was not enthusiastic about the idea of befriending Bakugo. He would invite someone from his temporary group of friends, but an image of Shiro, Kirishima, and Ishido appeared in his mind, forming a circle around Kaminari, chanting chug, 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 as he tried to suck in as much milk as possible before drowning his brain in dairy, and he quickly dismissed the idea. It wasn't often that Bakugo had the most functional neurons in the room, but with that group, in fact, they were blessed with their existence. "Invite Tenya," Dad said suddenly, and Hitoshi looked at him in alarm. "Excuse me." It was no secret that Ida and Hitoshi didn't get along. Sure, Hitoshi had seen him a lot since his parents picked him up at age 7. Tensei was an old friend, part of his graduating class. They had tried to get Tenya and Hitoshi to get along for about a year before giving up. Tenya was too prim and formal, getting angry whenever Hitoshi appeared dirty and fresh from a fight. Hitoshi got into a lot of fights. After all, he had a villainous gift, and the resentment was evident. Tenya had been blessed with a perfect gift for heroic deeds. Rescue in action could easily be his bitch. Hitoshi had been a bit spoiled, but Tenya just. I hadn't understood it. At first, Hitoshi tried to explain to him why he had to fight, how trying to talk it over would only make things worse with his gift, it would only make them angrier. But Tenya had gone out of his mind, and after a particularly bad fight where Hitoshi lost control of his gift, they just decided to keep them apart. It was the last time he lost control. Tenya had forgiven him, and that only made Hitoshi hate him even more. Only Tenya could forgive in a way that seemed condescending. It had erupted when Tenya compared it to crashing into walls and suffering concussions until I was 6 years old, said some really ugly that was misunderstood. More specifically, he had sarcastically hinted that maybe it was brain damage that made him so obtuse, and it was only after saying it that he realized the implications of saying something like that to an autistic person. And then he yelled at him to hit him. He didn't. I would never do it. Tenya still didn't understand that words always hurt more. Tenya hadn't forgiven him, and Hitoshi hadn't forgiven himself either. They did not see each other again without supervision until the first day of school. Tenya saw him sitting at the desk and immediately went after Bakugo. The message was clear. If you turn away from me, I will walk away from you. Do whatever you want, you are lost, always. It didn't hurt. It didn't hurt that Ida immediately searched for him in the crowd after USJ. It didn't hurt when her eyes fell on him. He felt a little relief before that unpleasant look, realizing what he had just felt, took hold of his face, and he looked away. It didn't hurt. Hitoshi might have had a friend, someone who would support him if he had focused a little more on running and less on fighting. Hitoshi had never had a real friend, only his parents, and the situation had only gotten worse. Siblings could be your friends. Maybe. Hitoshi wasn't sure. It was just that. There was something about them. His way of seeming so carefree but reserved at the same time. The way he was as alien to them as they were to him. Someone his age. Someone they had a chance with. Someone with whom they had the same idea of making friends as they did. They had a perfect quirk for heroism, but Hitoshi suspected they had a dark side. He knew better than anyone how poisonous mushrooms could be. That, coupled with the fact that Fagelin had been forced to kill, probably had a great psychological impact on him. He saw Izuku humming, "I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight," and changed the song immediately. His father didn't even comment that Izuku had taken control of his phone. He saw that little flash of fear when he realized what he did. And Hitoshi too. Hitoshi wanted to see his wrestling playlist. I knew I had one. Hitoshi also loved music. He could not imagine what it would be like to need her to fight, but also to live in fear. Izuku almost killed himself. If his lips had been opened, he would have fallen dead in front of Hitoshi. And it was normal. Another one bites the dust would be a disaster. Toxic. Bohemian Rhapsody, perhaps. Stairway to Heaven. Hitoshi had seen Papa after that little incident. He spent the entire night checking his phone, deleting possible death when opening Izuku's mouth songs. Just in case. That night, Hitoshi had set out to find out the extent of Izuku's gift. The answer was everything. He could craft items, like at the sports festival, but he could also spark events, and much more. Hooked on a feeling, left a group of apathetic and lazy protesters, dancing aimlessly in the street. Cherry Bomb provided him with real explosives. Zoro and Fuga had unleashed a stampede of terribly intelligent foxes in the streets to finish off the villains. It was ridiculous. His gift was broken, damn it. And Faglin's, by comparison, was literally a work of art. It was all just mind-blowing. He realized that Dad hadn't responded. He was just looking at Hitoshi, as if it was obvious. He's going to say no, Hitoshi said petulantly. He was not petulant. He was calm and serene at such a terrible idea. Then you have to convince him, Dad replied, as if it were obvious, and Hitoshi took a big swig of his coffee. Why Tenya? Your whole fighting style is literally based on you being able to read people. You troublesome kid, Dad said flatly, and Hitoshi blinked. Uncle Tensei. That's even less of a reason for him to listen to anyone, least of all me. You'll want to be in the hospital, not with a guy you hate. Do I have to bring Yui? Dad threatened, and Hitoshi turned pale. I just don't understand why you think this would be a good idea. Dad looked out the window at the land as they climbed the stairs. Because it looks like Tenya is going to do something stupid, and if anyone can convince him that it's a bad idea, it would be two ex-vigilantes who got into the business for, possibly even more serious reasons. Hitoshi stopped and grabbed his father's elbow. His father raised an eyebrow at him. Tenya doesn't do stupid things, she blurted out, and stared at Dad. He stared back at her. He's 15 years old, just like you, Hitoshi. Hitoshi's gaze peered into his father's impassive face. The news had just announced that Tensei was in the hospital, and with the chaos of accommodating the two new children, Dad hadn't talked about it. Or wouldn't he? How serious is it? Hitoshi asked quietly. Dad stared at him before letting go of his elbow. He was not yet healed enough. Hitoshi felt bad. It's bad enough, he replied, just as calmly. It was so gentle that Hitoshi knew he would have to take it as an answer. How do you know this won't ruin everything before it starts? Hitoshi challenged him. Dad's face softened, just enough. Because only a few days have passed. They still need to feel like heroes. And Tenya won't be able to resist asking. He'll need to know, and the answers will be right in front of him. What if they don't give you the right answer? Hitoshi asked. Dad pursed his lips. We just have to trust them. We barely know them. I know enough, Dad said suddenly. Let's go. I want to take a nap in the living room before starting class. And the conversation ended. Hitoshi watched him walk away before staring at the empty thermos in his hand. I needed more anyway. It was going to require a divine work and lethal amounts of caffeine to pull off such a big manipulation. At least one constant would remain. Tenya was always easy to manipulate when he was absorbed in his own thoughts. This was not going well. Hitoshi had been keeping an eye on Tenya all day, and the amount of good wishes they sent him was enough to make him burst out with anger. Bakugo had been watching the spectacle out of the corner of his eye, and had even, at one point, yelled at Uraraka to step aside, or he would. Ida had told him that he could manage on his own, thank you, and that if he wanted to be left alone, he would say so, but Hitoshi was still an expert on Ida Tenya and all its peculiarities. He was relieved. Bakugo probably knew how he felt, and from the look Tenya gave him, he suspected that Bakugo was going through some shit. No one yet knew of the connection between the mysterious Midoriyas and the Bakugas, but it would soon become apparent. The only thing that overshadowed the attack and hospitalization of Ingenium was the fact that they were going to have experienced American professionals in their class. It was exhausting. They would be surprised when Feiglin and Izuku appeared. Hitoshi was quite amused by the fact that, of all, only he and Bakugo knew that the mysterious, lethal, and brutal druid liked to have more glow on his face than on his skin. Nizu had expressed dismay at how little she had bought at the cosmetics store and had given her credit card to order all the makeup she wanted online, with fast shipping included. He had been even more disappointed when he found out that Izuku hadn't gone to a music store. Once they came out of quarantine, Izuku was apparently supposed to take his happy little butt to the music store to try out all the guitars there with Hitoshi until he found the perfect one. Hitoshi's tired gaze fell back on Tenya. His moment of rest would soon come. Tenya was too prim and correct to take advantage of his permission to leave whenever he wanted, no matter how bright the world was to him. But if anything was going to push him there, it would be this. Things got worse when it came time to choose names. Hitoshi didn't look at Tenya when he wrote, "Mind Jack," on his chalkboard. Tenya had chosen that name, apparently centuries ago. Hitoshi had never abandoned him. When Ida came up with his name, as did Shudo, Hitoshi frowned silently, looking at his desk. Tensei had told him to adopt the family name. I knew it. He couldn't prove it, but the damage done was pushing him to retreat. Hitoshi wasn't sure how to feel about it. The break came after lunch. Hitoshi was counting the minutes, even the seconds. Tenya was squeezing the pencil too tightly. He should have taken the day off. The pencil broke, and Tenya simply got up and walked out. Uraraka tried to get up, but a withering look from Dad made her fall. Shinso, Dad said. Go see how he's doing. A wave of confusion swept through the classroom. No one, until then, knew that Hitoshi was the son of two of his teachers, and absolutely no one knew that he and Tenya even knew each other. After all, they only spoke in a short, breathy voice, just by their last names, and to the point. Hitoshi had no idea how to explain it. He just nodded, got up, and walked out. He knew where Tenya would go. Like Feiglin, he hated the noise of anything mechanical, especially air conditioning. The fans were more relaxing, and the fluorescent lights in the hallways didn't help. Wandering feet carried him down the stairs, just in time to catch up with Uncle Tensei's younger brother. Ida, Hitoshi called. Tenya tensed imperceptibly, but kept walking. Hitoshi sighed and quickened his pace as Tenya made her way to the front door. Tenya, he said sharply, and that made him stop, his hand on the smooth piece of metal. I'm not in a good mood, Hitoshi, Tenya said quietly, and you have an uncanny ability to put me in a bad mood. Hitoshi's eyebrows rose, and he leaned against the railing. Apparently, he said, slurring his words. Tenya stiffened again before pushing open the door and walking out. Hitoshi heaved a sigh before resigning himself to following him. Tenya didn't try to stop him. A winding path led them to the terrain, a small cobblestone path that led them to a grove of trees with a bubbling fountain out of sight of the windows, a low bench half swallowed by an imposing tree. Hitoshi stood behind, slumped against a tree with his arms crossed as he watched Tenya stare at the water. I shouldn't have left class, Tenya said after a long, tense silence. I am the class delegate. One of his votes had been for Hitoshi. I wasn't going to tell him. You have permission for something, Hitoshi said. Tenya didn't answer, which she appreciated. I needed to find a way to present it. To tell him bluntly that he wanted former vigilantes to convince him not to pursue the man who had taken his brother to the hospital would be a mistake. After all, that would also be accusing the damned Ida Tenya of even considering the idea of a crime. Better not know they were there. He could accuse Hitoshi of being a manipulator afterwards. Not that I said the word mammon, but I would definitely think so. Hitoshi's gaze drifted to his phone. He had followed Feiglin and Izuku's Twitter accounts on a whim, and they were, to say the least, weird. Feiglin mostly tweeted positive statements, peppered with fun facts about wild mushrooms and photos from his hikes. Izuku, on the other hand, exclusively published photos of himself secretly of musicians. Apparently, in the United States, it had become a viral challenge to try to catch Mockingjay taking a spontaneous selfie with an unknown band in the background. He even cited on Twitter some particularly creative attempts to catch him in action. None had published since the sports festival. Only a few days had passed, and they were still trending. Sure, Nizu said something, but most weren't entirely convinced they hadn't been brought to the United States. Izuku had said that they were waiting to have their costumes before doing a short live broadcast in Japan with a Japanese professional to reassure people. Any tweet would only generate more conspiracy theories. He wanted to find inspiration there, but it was all his doing. Trying to help someone I had hurt. Someone who had only tried to help him. There were 8 of them. Tenya was not one to hold grudges. Perhaps he just believed that Hitoshi didn't want to know anything about him. No, it wasn't that. Hitoshi had been his first experience with the real world. The realization that, sometimes, things couldn't be the way he wanted. The realization that he couldn't always help people by being himself. Hitoshi had been his first dose of realization that no matter how good he was, there were situations where he simply couldn't help. And I was getting that dose again. Whatever had happened to Hitoshi's uncle had taken its toll on him, and Tenya just couldn't accept that he couldn't help again. I couldn't accept failure again. Tenya didn't hate him. He hated what Hitoshi represented. That Tenya was so privileged that he could never understand what it meant to someone who was born to be hated. And if you couldn't understand that, you couldn't help someone before the world pushed them off the cliff and led them down the villain's path. Tenya simply couldn't accept that he wasn't trained to help everyone. Hitoshi hadn't needed to hear that he hadn't been born to be a villain of a well-meaning child who had no idea what he was talking about. Hitoshi had needed to hear it from his father, the man who stole people's quirks, even if only temporarily, and for Tenya to pressure him while he was still recovering simply. It hadn't helped. If Hitoshi didn't say anything, they would simply stay there until Tenya decided that she was fit to return to school. Come today, Hitoshi blurted out, and Tenya, honest by the gods, jumped up. What? Tenya choked up, and Hitoshi gave her Aizawa's famously expressionless gaze. Come today, Hitoshi repeated. After school. Do you want to hang out? Tenya stammered, and Hitoshi decided that if there was ever a time to tell the truth with a lie, it was now. No, Hitoshi said flatly. Then why would you volunteer? Tenya asked. Now he was in front of Hitoshi, with an expression of utter stupefaction. Hitoshi had hardly seen that face. I wished I didn't have to see her now. Because if you don't come, you'll go to the hospital. And if you go to the hospital, Yui will sit there trying to figure out how to take care of Uncle Tensei and how to make sure you're okay. And, no offense, it's a huge burden. Because I know for a fact that for the rest of this week, maybe even all of spring break, she, your father, and your brother will be begging you to go home and stop sleeping in the hospital and smashing your neck. You'll refuse to eat anything but that horrible hospital food with textures that will probably get on your nerves, because that's what Tensei has. You'll stand there staring at the vending machine in the hallway, trying to figure out what you can stand for Tensei to drink. You'll ignore every meltdown those damn fluorescent lights throw at you. You will dream of heart monitors. Imagine the smells. Don't get upset when you're a fucking liar and everybody knows it, and you're going to kill them with fear. So come so that your mother will focus on Tensei and trust that dad will focus on you. Tenya was staring at him. He was staring at him, and before he could protest, Hitoshi simply moved forward. We don't even have to talk. I can hide in my room and you can drown under the couch cats and watch a movie or something. Or we can watch the film both and pretend that the other does not exist. We can sit on opposite sides of the room and do our homework. I don't give a damn. Only, take one more burden off your mother and let someone else take care of you right now. Make him believe that you might be okay. Give him time to stay in the hospital without feeling guilty that you're there too, or to clean the house privately. You already know that she likes to clean up on her own to de-stress. We can take the futon out if you decide to stay overnight. Tonight there is lasagna. We're trying Western food, and I know you like pasta. I have a pair of sweatpants that could fit you. Hitoshi didn't mention that Fagelin was cooking the lasagna. Tenya could figure it out on his own, but judging by the biscuits Fagelin baked yesterday, he was an exceptional cook. Tenya would probably like it. Tenya was still stiff. He looked at Hitoshi as if he didn't know what to do with him, and Hitoshi realized that it was probably the first time today that someone was trying to be helpful. It hurt a little. People used to think of Tenya as self-sufficient, able to process anything and move on, but nothing could be further from the truth. Tenya needed more help than most with her own emotions. He was incredibly good at managing other people's. That was all. Honestly, Hitoshi didn't understand that it was Leo. It should have been a Cancer. Then again, none of this damn class had any sun signs that made sense. Bakugo was Taurus. He had discovered it last week. He had also discovered that Bakugu cared enough about astrology to use it to make fun of people, as was evident when he accused Fagelin of being a Pisces, when Fagelin managed to sit him down long enough to put eyeshadow on him through an impressive guilt campaign. He then proceeded to tell him that he was holding the brush wrong. Only then did Hitoshi remember that Bakugu had grown up behind the scenes of fashion shows. Really, there were too many children of celebrities wreaking havoc, including Hitoshi, apparently. Still, it was weird. Hitoshi's gaze returned to Tenya. A tense silence, broken only by the murmur of the fountain, spread. I could wait. Tenya became discouraged, and Hitoshi barely resisted the urge to breathe a sigh of relief. Thank God. I had nothing more to say. All right, Tenya said. His voice sounded so small. Thank you, Hitoshi. Something tiny and fragile fluttered in Hitoshi's chest. Sure, he was a manipulator, but that didn't mean he wasn't cruel. He worried in his own way. School ends in 15 minutes, Hitoshi said carefully. We are out of class. Want to avoid the crowd and walk home? Dad gave me permission to go and get you. I can send you a message to bring our backpacks. Tenya hesitated, and Hitoshi sighed. Don't be so nervous, Tenya. We are not playing the rat. It's 15 minutes, and it'll take us 10 minutes to get back anyway. Dad can tell the class that you're okay. You don't have to see them, and I know you don't want to see them. Let's go. Tenya pursed her lips and nodded with a very trembling gesture. He held back another sigh of relief, and Hitoshi unlocked his phone. Tired son. Hey, Dad, can you bring us the bags? We go home early. He comes. He'll probably stay overnight, if you want to try and get him some clothes. It took Dad less than 30 seconds to respond, and Hitoshi knew he was texting again in his sleeping bag. Tired father, sure. Send a message to the kids to let them know. Tired son, noted gist? Tiredness, you need to work on your communication skills. Tired son, I can stand it from Dad, but you're a fool. Tiredness, shut up, brat. Take Tenya home. Dad's going to try to get you some clothes, in case you want to stay. Let's go, Hitoshi said, shaking his head. Right to Yui. Tenya already had her phone ready, and Hitoshi let out a trembling sigh. This was fine. He could deal with disasters. This would be fine. In hindsight, Tenya should have thought better of it. It was Shinso Hitoshi. Of course, he was hiding information. It was Shinso Hitoshi. They had not been warned that they would not be alone with their uncles. As far as he knew, it was radio night, which should have been another red light, because Hitoshi wasn't going to talk about lasagna if Uncle Shoyuta was cooking. So, actually, I should have been prepared. Hitoshi closed the door and removed his shoes in the jink and before giving Tenya an apologetic look as Tenya took off his. Tenya should have noticed. He didn't. Hitoshi shouted, the loudest Tenya had ever heard him, out of a state of anguish, as if he were warning someone. Tenya didn't remember Hitoshi being so considerate. Guys, Tenya repeated, and Hitoshi grimaced. I thought it would be better not to tell you right away. You would have been scared. Will you excuse me? Tenya asked hesitantly. I should have thought better of it. Hitoshi opened the door to the hall, and Tenya's eyes widened. There was a boy there. A boy of her age, with long brown hair, soft, pulled back in a high and disheveled ponytail, and a bow. A blue bow, to be exact, the same shade as Tenya's hair. I couldn't see his face, but she was wearing a short, flowing black skirt, lying on one of those popular squishmallows, with his back to them, his shins crossed in the air and furry socks sliding down his ankles. Very, very marked pimples. Honeycomb scars, to be exact, as if they were deliberate. In front of him was a laptop, open in a kind of programming application with lines of code that Tenya didn't understand. She was wearing a short button-down top with a Peter Pan collar, and that's when Tenya's head lit up at the sight of her soft, tan skin, interspersed with those same white, striated scars. And there were many other scars as well. Were they gunshot wounds? And then he sat up and looked at them, and that's when Tenya's mind collapsed. High cheekbones, a narrow face and a majestic nose, thick eyelashes, dense and defined eyebrows like I had never seen, thick and fleshy lips, and golden eyes. Golden eyes highlighted by a lot of silver shine that brushed her cheekbones, temples, eyelids, and the brow arch. And his shirt had small UFOs stamped on it. Tiny sky blue UFOs. Tinya's eyes bulged out of their sockets as the boy delicately tilted his head toward him. The soft, curly brown hair fell over her shoulder, and Tinya felt as if All Might had given her a roundhouse kick in the chest. There was a creaking sound on the stairs, but Tinya couldn't look away. He stared at the boy sitting modestly on the floor, about to gasp as he tried to speak. Were they freckles? Tinya, your exhaust pipes are going to set off the smoke alarms, Hitoshi said softly. Oh, it's Ida, Tinya, someone said, and Tinya looked away to look at the other boy on the stairs. Lo, was his first thought. Green was next. Very, very green. Wayward green curls falling from a tousled bun, big green eyes, more freckles. Why were there so many freckles in this house? Who were these boys, chubby cheeks and innocent-looking faces, if not for the scar across his eyebrow? Tinya, this is Midoriya Izuku, Hitoshi said and gestured towards the green. And this is Midoriya Fagelin. And the other gesture was towards the cute on the ground. You can call us by our names. The beauty finally spoke, and Tinya's brain turned into a cloud of static. As sweet as it sounds. Midoriya, have you called us by our names yet? That way it will be easier. Wait. Midoriya? The alarmed gazes were directed to Hitoshi, who simply looked at him with that infuriating expression. Midoriya, Tinya repeated silently. His mouth was too dry. Nizu took them to Dad and Dad. Hitoshi replied with a shrug. Don't tell anyone that they are with us. Tinya's brain finally functioned again and straightened up like a rod. Of course, I would never betray this secret you have entrusted to me. Thank you very much, Hitoshi. Tinya, without a doubt, had more important things on his mind than the fiasco that ended the sports festival. It was disconcerting that he had almost been on that stage, that he could have met them, but his brother was paralyzed in the hospital, with his hero career over, with his attacker free and strutting around Japan without a care. Mom had said it would cause a lot of trouble. Replays of the attack were on the hospital-wide newscasts, but in Tensei's room, the TV was on reruns of old romantic comedies. Obviously, the news about heroes disturbed him, and the thought that Tinya had almost been attacked again only stressed him out. Tinya hadn't paid much attention to the chatter. As a class representative, he had been a little worried when it was mentioned that they would be at 1A, but he had decided to cross that bridge when the time came. Without a doubt, they would fall for criticism. General education students were looking to fill those two positions, but suddenly 2 people who already had their licenses occupied them, who had not even gone to the UA. Tinya was going to have a lot of work trying to minimize the resentment. There were rumors that 3 people would be expelled from 1B, but that was no great consolation. It only meant that 3 people would be promoted instead of 5 if they managed to prove themselves at the festival. Honestly, none of the general education students had stood out this year. Tinya's main goal was to ensure that all members of 1A made it to graduation. They had already survived an attack and had lost 2 students as a result. And now there had been another attack, where the students of 1A were once again in the spotlight. The tension was real. Belatedly, it occurred to him that he would have reformed criminals of his class. Real criminals. Tinya blinked again, harshly, and struggled to think about what to say. A pretty criminal. That she looked good in a skirt. True. Oh dear, you'd have to worry about scar harassment too, wouldn't you? Fagelin stood up, and Tinya realized that he was short. Who was Fagelin? Druid or Mockingjay? I should have done some research over the weekend. There were so many things going on, and... Short. It didn't even reach his chin. Tinya could lift it. His mouth was dry again. Tensei would be howling right now. A criminal was drying out his mouth. Why was his mouth dry? Why couldn't he speak? Was he nervous? He had never interacted with criminals, but they were also heroes. At his age, America was a really strange place. Fagelin passed by him, and Tinya belatedly realized that he smelled of sea spray. Oh. Hold on. They had been vigilantes. Why did they become vigilantes again? I'd have to do a quick search while I'm here. There were so many things going on. He should have taken his duties as a class representative more seriously. There was no excuse. Without being asked, his eyes followed Fagelin's process to the kitchen, and the smell of bolognese filled his nose as Fagelin lifted the lid of the simmering pot. My God, was it legal for something to smell so good? Tinya loved a good beef stew, but anything with minced meat was also very popular. What about tomato sauce? He knew that they had planned lasagna before Hitoshi invited him, but he couldn't help but feel that they were bribing him. Tenya, Hitoshi said, and nudged him on the shoulder. Daddy is going to buy you clothes. He will return soon with the task. You should ask Izuku or Fagelin for help with English, if Dad doesn't get them to correct. Of course, it would be a mistake of me not to accept help from native speakers, Tenya declared, before fully absorbing what Hitoshi had said. Uncle Shoyuta must have been giving them an answer guide or something. He was very prone to passing Hisashi's work on to others when he was away. It's not exactly native, Fagelin shouted from the kitchen as she recapped the computer and crawled back into the living room to collapse in front of her laptop. It could not measure more than 152 centimeters. Tenya thought that American high school students tended to be taller than their Japanese counterparts. Wasn't the average height of the men their 182 centimeters? What do you mean? Tenya asked as Hitoshi slumped into the worn-out armchair. Tenya raised an eyebrow and, hesitantly, sat down on the sofa, quite stiff. It was awkward to step over Fagelin, who didn't seem bothered in the least. Izuku lived in Japan until he was 5 years old, Fagelin replied with a slight shrug as he typed in the code, fixed something, and tried to run it again. And if the mother tongues are the ones they teach you at birth, I have Russian, English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic. So I guess English is a mother tongue, but it doesn't really look like it. After a certain point, nothing feels like a native. Japanese feels more native, and I learned that at the 7. Was it 7, Zuku? And then Fagelin threw her head back, staring at the ceiling, trying to catch a glimpse of Izuku in vain. Izuku shrugged as he sat on the couch in front of Tenya, at Fagelin's feet, and crossed his legs. I have no idea. Bagel. It wasn't there. Izuku replied, and Tenya tried to remember what a bagel was. What a weird nickname. Ah, yes. The Jewish bread bun. It was a popular breakfast in the United States. Why was Fagelin a bagel? It didn't look like a bread bun. You weren't. Fagelin confirmed and refocused on what he was doing on the laptop, opening a search engine to type in a question. Tensei had told Tenya that 90% of the programming was Google. Apparently, it was true. So, are you staying with my uncles? Tenya asked to start a conversation. Yes, Izuku said firmly. It's very exciting. Present Mike has always been a great inspiration to me. And speaking of which, I have to paint again. It was then that Tenya noticed that there were 3 large Present Mike stuffed animals on the floor, on top of a pile of newspapers, and that Izuku, apparently, had been lowering fabric paint. How artistic. Tenya wasn't very artistic. There was an awkward silence as Izuku sat down in front of the stuffed animals, brush in hand, and painted again. He was covering one entirely with spirals and purple flowers. Was it for Hitoshi? Had they already gotten the same stuffed animals? Tenya, curiously, felt a little left out. Sure, he and Hitoshi hadn't spoken to each other in years. They only tolerated each other in social situations. Hitoshi used to be withdrawn, with his cell phone, sending messages to people in those probably illegal forums that he preferred to frequent. Tenya, on the other hand, used to be surrounded by adults, always so sociable for his age. I knew that Hitoshi's social exile was somewhat self-imposed. Tenya always had friends at school. Hitoshi, however, Tenya often sank into indifference. But that didn't mean he didn't have ears. When Uncle Hisashi arrived, he overheard those quiet conversations with Tensei. How Hitoshi was being harassed again. How she didn't know how to help because she refused to ask for help. As if he got into another fight. This time they could catch him and ruin his chances in the UA. Just a year ago, Tenya realized his mistake. It had taken years, but he did it. He knew he was wrong when Hitoshi finally took his advice and fled, refusing to defend himself because he knew as well as Uncle Hisashi that he would not be able to go to the UA. His high schools were only a 10-minute walk away, and Tenya had seen him running down the street with a gang of boys behind him. I really should have acted. I should have. But he thought that with Hitoshi's training to make up for the lack of a physical quirk, he would be able to escape them, and he would get angry if Tenya interfered. Tenya also had to worry about UA. He did not overcome them. The next day, Tensei cut short his patrol car to go to the hospital. Tenya saw Hitoshi 3 days later, with a black eye, a split lip, broken ribs, burst fingers, and a cast arm. His shoulder was dislocated, and the bruises were horrible. Tensei took Tenya to the Yamadezawa residence to be checked. and Hitoshi looked completely miserable, sitting on the couch while Uncle Shoyuta applied bruise cream to his shoulder. Her entire chest was a huge bruise from the fractures, with clean spots from the reset cut on her flesh, hidden under bandages that Shoyuta patiently changed as Tinya tried to look at someone but the cousin she had failed. They expelled children. A police investigation was opened. Teachers were fired. The principal was replaced, and the school nearly closed as video cameras revealed Hitoshi's tutor watching as the gang chased Hitoshi out the front door. When Yamada Hizashi first appeared at the school in place of Aizawa Shoyuta, the entire institution was thrown into chaos because no one knew that the student who was constantly bullied was the son of a professional hero. It had been terrible. Tensei had taken Tinya out when Hizashi broke down and began to cry, almost screaming at Hitoshi, asking him why he could never tell her. Why he had to wait until he was in the hospital so they could help him. Tinya knew why Hitoshi had to fight that day. Hitoshi hadn't seen him there with his group of friends. He didn't know that Tinya hadn't done anything. It was that failure that prompted Tinya to pull Uraraka out of the rubble on the day of the entrance exam, pick her up, and run, because she now understood the consequences of not acting. It had left a bitter taste in his mouth when the rescue points were announced. He didn't feel like he deserved it, because someone had to have been hurt by now for him to do what he did. Tinya wanted to be a hero, but looking at Hitoshi, he couldn't help but feel that he would never make it. In the locker room, he had ignored the scars from the surgery on his chest. His lung almost punctured. If so, he would have drowned before Fallen found him slumped in an alley. Perhaps that is why he was furious about the cancellation of practices. He wanted to go to Hosu. He would never be a good enough hero, but at least he could right a wrong before he messed it all up. Someone who let his cousin die of a beating couldn't carry on Ida's legacy. Tensei would not have allowed that to happen. Tensei would have been better, stronger, more decisive if it had been Tinya. Hitoshi would never have been injured if Tensei had been in front of Sumai that day, whether he was a high school student or not. And now Tensei could not continue the legacy. It had been Tinya's turn, because Tensei couldn't look away. He didn't tell Tinya what had happened. He was still drugged and adrift, except for that one moment of lucidity when he told him to become the next Ingenium. But Tensei had always been in the habit of talking in his sleep. His mother would tell him that if anyone wanted to dismantle his agency, they would only have to listen to him snore for 45 minutes. Stain had attacked Fallen. Of course it was Fallen. And Tensei couldn't look away, so he paid the price. The chessboard may be different, but the pieces were always the same. Fallen had a scandal shortly after the incident with Hitoshi. He was an irresponsible father. He hadn't seen his daughter in a year, and his ex-wife had taken him to court to ask him to take away his visitation rights because, after all, he wasn't there, and it was cruel to delude his daughter. Fallen had exercised his pro-hero power to ensure that he maintained visitation rights, and the maintenance remained the same. I wanted to have the choice. It wasn't about helping her daughter. It was a matter of making it convenient. It was difficult to reconcile that man with the hero who found Hitoshi, the one who gave him first aid to save his life, the one who accompanied him in the ambulance until Uncle Hizashi arrived and stayed outside the hospital room. Because he also had an evil quirk. It wasn't often that high school students caused more damage than real villains. The same thing had happened to him. Uncle Shoyuta was furious when the tabloids broke the news, because Hitoshi evidently admired him. He had said something to her. And now Fallen was barely alive, and Tensei would never walk again. Tinya couldn't be a hero. He had kept that statement a secret, refusing to even utter it, for a year, but now? Now I knew. He couldn't be a hero. Simply, it wasn't Tensei. He was a coward. He was apathetic. It wasn't perfect. Not like Tensei. So the decision was much easier. Only now he could not carry it out. There were no practices this year. He would have to wait until next year, if Stain had not been brought to justice by then. Which meant that he would have to pretend, again, for another 12 months if they didn't get an internship either. Hitoshi was looking at her the same look he'd been giving her all day, when he thought Tinya couldn't catch it. Tinya, belatedly, realized that his hands were clenched in his pants. It was difficult for him to keep his composure. Izuku was still painting, and Fagelin was still fiddling with his laptop. Tinya saw the tabs at the top of the screen. He was looking at himself. True, Tinya should focus on that, not on Stain, not on Tensei, not on Hitoshi. I couldn't do anything about it. Not now. The damage was done, and he felt bad. Hitoshi didn't know. He hadn't seen Tenya, and now he was showing his kindness to him and his family. And Tenya had let it go. He couldn't help but feel cruel and manipulative. Hitoshi didn't know what he meant when he said it might put him in a worse mood. Tenya would never get rid of that guilt, not until she had the courage to tell the truth, and she just didn't. And even when he did, he doubted he could let her go. It could make things worse. It had been selfish of Tenya to say so. It wasn't Hitoshi's fault. If anything, it was his. I should have told him to keep fighting, to tell his parents, to do whatever. He should have demanded to go to the same high school so he could keep an eye on Hitoshi fiercely and document. I should have done something. But he didn't. He went to Sumai, made friends who would never know how terrible he was, watched as Hitoshi continued to isolate himself from the world, listened to Uncle Hizashi complain about the new bruises, the broken lips, the curt answers, and the dejected look. He left Hitoshi behind. Tenya could only hope that Hitoshi would befriend these Midoriyas, as the bridge between the two was completely burned, even if Tenya was sitting at home. He needed to focus on the Midoriya. Hitoshi pulled the headphones out of his pocket and returned to focus on whatever he was doing on his phone. With a silent, resigned sigh amid the discomfort, Tenya opened her finder and set out to investigate. As more articles appeared, slowly and steadily, it began to become more and more difficult for him to ignore the extremely beautiful, extremely interesting, and busy person at his feet. Fagelin was also autistic. It had started with the intention of killing. It had started out damaged and broken, and the situation had only gotten worse. Furtive glances fell on Izuku, who was painting with satisfaction, and now on the second present mic, decorated with mushrooms. Panic was growing in Tenya's chest because she literally didn't know what to do. Should she bring it up? Should she ask questions? Should she pretend they were just nondescript foster children fresh out of foster care? What was he supposed to do with two former child soldiers in his class? One of them, without a doubt, would be the center of the debate about what constituted a human being. Was it protecting them, or would it be rude? What was I supposed to do? Her phone vibrated with a message, and Tenya frowned severely. Hitoshi was sending him a message. Hitoshi, your poker face could be improved a bit. Tenya looked at him. His face, as always, gave nothing away. Tenya, it's rude to text someone who's sitting 5 feet away. Hitoshi, so is staring. And Google someone who's sitting right in front of you. Take it easy. They are no different from the rest of the class. Tenya, I think we need to examine what you think it means different. Hitoshi actually smiled as his fingers flew across the screen. Hitoshi, they're hormonal teenagers who can't deal with social situations like we can. I don't see the problem. Hell, hopefully, Faye could get hormonal for you. Tenya felt the heat rise to her cheeks as she dared to look at the boy at her feet. He had delicate fingers, like those of a pianist. They moved with great fluidity. Tenya, what do you say? Hitoshi, you literally started smoking the second he looked at you. In his corner, Hitoshi laughed slyly. His laughter was as cruel as Uncle Shoota's. Hitoshi, you almost set your pants on fire. Tenya, I assure you that there is nothing hormonal here. Hitoshi, was it the freckles or the eyes? Tenya had a terrible feeling that her eyes were about to pop out of their sockets when Fagelin chose that moment to sit up and stretch, exposing more skin. His back creaked, and Tenya was convinced that the sofa was about to swallow him whole. A curious glance was directed towards him before Fagelin moved to sit on the ground, right in front of Tenya's knees, and looked directly at him. Is your skin heat-resistant? Asked Fagelin, and Tenya blinked a couple of times. Excuse me. Hitoshi said your quirk is the engines in your calves, Fagelin stated flatly. The metal needs to get very hot. So I was wondering if your skin is heat-resistant or if you have scars around the engines. Oh, the skin on my legs is heat-resistant. As far as I know, the rest of my body doesn't, Tenya replied as Izuku perked up. How many gears can you shift? Asked Izuku, and Hitoshi hid a smile, as if Tenya had inadvertently gotten into trouble. 6, like a motorcycle, Tenya replied cautiously. Can you skip gears, or do you have to raise them manually? Asked Izuku. How does it work? Can the motors be removed? Will they grow back if you do? Did you start with fewer gears and get more? Sorry if I ask too much. You can tell me to stop. We love quirks, and most mutations are organic, not mechanical. We don't come across many mechanical mutations. I don't care in the least, said Tenya, though he felt he should care for some reason. But then Faglin's eyes flashed, and Tenya decided that she was telling the truth. I have to bring the water to a boil. Don't answer until I come back. Faglin blurted out and sprang up, her skirt fluttering, for want of a better expression, and ran into the kitchen. Tenya blinked a couple of times at the abrupt exit, as she tried to reconcile that with the video of him fighting at the sports festival. Faglin disappeared into the kitchen and Tenya, for some unknown reason, stood up to follow him. Izuku was a little discouraged, but Tenya was in the clouds. Faglin was standing by the sink, the pot under the tap, adding a drizzle of oil and a pinch of salt. Tenya stood there for a moment, completely oblivious to the purple and green eyes piercing his back as Faglin waited patiently for the pot to fill. Tenya wanted to ask, but he was practically born with impeccable manners. His mother loved to tell people that the first word that came out of her mouth wasn't mama, or dada, or even tensei, but please, while Tensei's first word, unsurprisingly, was no. Can I call you Tenya, or do you prefer Ida? Faglin asked suddenly, and the reminder of his surname, which he had no hope of honoring, weighed like a stone in his stomach. Tenya is all right, Tenya said hoarsely, and Faglin looked over her shoulder. He cocked his head again, with that innocent and wide-eyed look that struck his chest like lightning. You don't have to answer questions about quirks if you don't want to, Faglin said suddenly. In the United States, they don't usually like to explain peculiarities so much. I have very little experience with Japan. In Japan, people are quite open with quirks, Tenya said, briefly recalling that Faglin and Izuku were basically foreigners. I thought, as class president, I will strive to make sure that no one in 1A posts photos online or interrogates them about American heroism. It is my duty to make sure that they have a regular school experience, and I will fulfill my duties to the best of my ability. Faglin turned off the water and let out a cheerful, bubbly laugh that left Tenya dizzy. I should ask Tensei about this, when he is no longer on painkillers and is more stable. Tensei always liked to help him understand what feelings were. You're funny, Faglin said suddenly, and turned to lean against the counter, crossing his arms as he looked at Tenya with shining eyes. You know that being a class delegate doesn't mean being a teacher, right? I would never think of it, but being a class representative is a great responsibility, and I would be remiss if I neglected my duties so easily. Tenya stammered as the heat rose to her cheeks. Stopping bullies is not a class delegate's duty, Faglin said diplomatically. It's a normal student duty, or just a decent person's duty. Faglin, of course, had no idea how much that statement hurt him. Tenya swallowed hard, aware of Hitoshi's location in the other room. Was he listening? Of course, but as a class delegate, I have to be even more aware. Faglin laughed again and got up from the counter to carry the pot to the stove and turn on the oven. Tenya's gaze was fixed on his well-defined thighs, the hint of an abdomen marked in that brief flash of skin, the predatory ease with which the former professional behaved. It didn't seem legal for someone to seem so lethal and yet so sweet. Tenya needed to investigate further. For the class, of course. There was a jingle of keys at the door, and everyone looked up the instant Uncle Shoyuta appeared in the Genkan. The man looked at the four boys rather suspiciously before dropping the two backpacks and a full duffel bag onto Hitoshi. What are the four of you doing? He asked sharply as he saw the mess of paint on the floor. Don't stain the wood with that. Of course not, Aizawa. Izuku snapped, waving his arms in a way that made Tenya very nervous about the possibility of a stroke. Stop agitating, said Uncle Shoyuta, slumping face down on the sofa. How had he managed to put on his sleeping bag yet? Where did he hide it? A red-eyed gaze fell on Tenya and straightened imperceptibly. It's good to see you around here, Ten, was all Uncle Shoyuta said, and Tenya wondered when was the last time he was in that house. His gaze fell on Hitoshi, and he swallowed. Right. It was then. Hitoshi glanced at him sideways, and Tenya immediately saw that he had come to the same conclusion. The two boys looked away, and an icy silence invaded the room. Oh, Izuku said suddenly as the silence dragged on. Did he realize the tension? Don't you have homework? Of course. Of course. Tenya exclaimed and went straight to her bag. We should change first, Hitoshi said, and Tenya looked down at her uniform. Yes, that would be important. You don't have enough leisure clothes. Uncle Shoyuta muttered on the sofa, and Tenya blinked. Yes. What quinceañero needs so many khaki pants? They are going to give you cat t-shirts for your birthday. Am I sorry? Was Uncle Shuta's only response as Hitoshi tossed his backpack to him. Tenya narrowed her eyes as she felt the weight. Surely a change of pajamas wouldn't weigh so much? Uncle Shoyuta? What? Why is my bag so heavy? Uncle Shoyuta barely turned his head, with all his hair on his face, and stared at Tenya. Yui said you can stay for a week. Tenya asked faintly, and Uncle Shuta's eyes swept over him for a second before deflating. Go change, and we'll see you in the courtyard, he ordered, and Tenya had a feeling that they were getting rid of him. Was he really that heavy? He was silent. He left the room when he was told to leave. He slept when he was told to sleep. He ate. It didn't bother Tensei. He had behaved well. An image from the heart monitor flickered erratically in his heart as he was hurriedly removed from the room. Tensei was convulsing in bed. His father had told him to take a walk. I hadn't cried. Not yet. He had simply sat on the floor of the hallway, listening to how they stabilized him. Was that why? Because he hadn't heard that time? He had heard everything else Mom and Dad had told him. He hadn't thrown a tantrum. Wait, if they sent him, did it mean that they wouldn't leave Hosu? Surely he could stay home alone while they were with Tensei. He was 15 years old. A week wasn't that much to be alone. Achicho lived alone. Many teenagers lived alone. It was normal in Japan. Didn't they trust him? Tenya, said Uncle Shoyuta. Go change. Tenya swallowed hard and grabbed her bag before heading to the family bathroom on the first floor. My fingers felt numb as he put on the sweatpants that he could roll up to his knees and the baggy t-shirt that once belonged to Tensei. It was a simple, black and straight one, without any frills. A few years ago it had mixed with Tenya's dirty clothes, when Tensei was still a companion and came home to wash, and it had just stuck to him. Did Uncle Shoyuta know when he put it in? Probably not. If Tenya imagined strongly enough, he could imagine the sweat and touch of rich, earthy cologne attached to him, fresh off a patrol that Tensei would never go to again. I wanted to cry. He hadn't done it yet. He felt dazed as he stepped out of the bathroom, his bare feet stepping on the wooden floor. The roller coaster of emotions was hard to follow. First, the dry mouth with Faglin's sweet smile, the hammering in his chest as he realized that his parents were getting rid of him, that they didn't trust him to be alone, the pain of failure as he realized he couldn't go to Hosu to avenge Tensei as he had planned, the crushing disappointment in accepting that it would never be enough. The isolation, realizing that he would never know how to talk about it, that he couldn't talk about it, because what kind of hero in training, what kind of Ida, he planned to become a vigilante, he planned to murder. He wanted to ask for help. He did it, but it would be better to do it, finish and die trying. There was a difference between a failure and a lifetime of failures. At least he could do something with a single failure than to spend his life failing. Uncle Shoyuta was waiting in the backyard. Tenya felt like a ghost as she stepped out onto the porch, standing there, her eyes dull, while Uncle Shoyuta sat down on one of the chairs. Sit down, Tenya, Uncle Shoyuta said quietly. Tenya sat stiffly, staring at the high wall, the net that covered the backyard to prevent the cats from escaping. Uncle Hizashi had put up a koi pond years ago, and it looked like they were getting fatter. The rose bushes were blooming again. Uncle Hizashi always lamented that they couldn't have trees because of the cats. They're not going to get rid of you, boy, Uncle Shoyuta said quietly. Tenya didn't look at him as he applied a few drops. He had changed too. He always looked more like himself in jeans and threadbare t-shirts. Then why am I here? Tenya asked hoarsely. Uncle Shuta's eyes fell on the koi pond, and he watched as the big fish moved lazily through the water. They want to protect you. Next week is going to be tough. Very hard. Once it's over, you'll recover. But trust me, you don't want to be there. I've seen it a million times. For a hero, the end of his career is like the end of his life. It's not like going to college after high school or trade school. This is something you train for from a young age. We have no other skills. We can only do one thing. Most can't stand the shame of going back to school late. even though most of us can afford it. That's why I insisted that Hisashi and I branch out, because the casualties are many. Hisashi wouldn't have his radio show if I wasn't worried about the possibility of this happening. The last thing Tensei wants is for you. You see it. Tenya vaguely remembered that right after Tensei turned pro and took over the agency, he came home one night and slept in his room, as if he feared that Tensei would disappear. His parents hadn't told him anything, made him his favorite grilled fish with rice in the morning, and Tensei had dropped him off at school for the first time in years. The news was announced a day later. One of Tensei's companions had kidnapped his son. Her son had died in the rescue. The companion had been injured to the point of retreat when he was desperately trying to save him. The night Tensei arrived, he committed suicide. Tensei had dropped him off at school and picked him up every day for a week, taken him to the agency after class to do his homework, and taken him home in the evening. He continued like this until one night, when Dad confronted him in the living room. He sent Tenya upstairs so that he wouldn't hear Tensei burst into tears. Tensei started seeing a therapist after that, and it was never mentioned again. Tenya went back to school alone, started to come home after class, but sometimes he saw a metallic flash in the crowd at the station. Tensei watching. Tenya never told her parents. But Tensei had recovered. That was the beginning of the inferiority complex. Tenya didn't recover like that. Even now, a year later, he found himself watching Hitoshi like a hawk, hoping that someone would dare to say something, hoping to catch even the slightest bruise, a brusque word, a sign that Yue wasn't as good as he seemed. A year later, Tenya couldn't stand it. And I couldn't ask for help. Not like Tensei, because he was better at hiding it than Tensei. He was more cunning, and he felt bad. Good action heroes weren't elusive. Hitoshi was elusive, but Hitoshi had to be. Their fighting style was based on stealth and subterfuge. The sneaky action heroes were the ones who fell, and Tenya knew it. He was never going to be Tensei. It was too early to measure up to her. Uncle Shoyuta was watching him. Tenya was still looking at the pond. "May I say no?" Tenya asked quietly. "No," said Uncle Shoyuta, and he had never sounded so kind. Tenya almost wanted to snap at him, but he still kept his manners. "But, you have the Midoriya. I'm going to get in the way," Tenya protested. "You never interfere, boy, and the Midoriyas. Well, it will take them a lot more than a week to adjust." "They seem well adjusted to me," Tenya said, and Uncle Shoyuta sighed. "Because that's how people manage, Tenya. They lost their parents, their exploitation was spread by the news, they were sent to another continent, and..." Uncle Shoyuta was silent, as if he was about to say something, but decided to bite his tongue. Think of it this way. If you had to pretend you were fine for 3 years of your life, under the threat of losing your brother, if that threat suddenly disappeared, would you be okay letting your guard down so quickly? Tenya was silent, reflecting. I just couldn't imagine that level of damage. Almost losing Tensei was hard enough. Growing up in a family of heroes was a nightmare. But it didn't have to do what they did. And with Faglin's pre-existing trauma, I wasn't sure how I would react. Izuku probably knew how to react differently. Faglin probably not. Uncle Shoyuta gave him an extremely serious look before venturing out to ask him a question. "Will you be okay?" "I'll be all right," Tenya said dryly. "There is very little to be done about it." "Hitoshi told me he told you not to tell anyone they're here." "Yes, he did," Tenya confirmed, and Shoyuta hummed quietly. "Thank goodness. It will soon cease to be a problem. After this attack, we are considering moving to a dorm system after spring break. Don't tell your colleagues." Tenya blinked. Dorms? Immediately, he thought of trying to control Kaminari and Ishido, and turned pale. "I will strive to keep Kaminari-influenced fainting to a minimum," Tenya vowed, and Shoyuta snorted. "Everything will be fine, Ten. I have instilled fear in Kami and punishment from day one. Go inside and get to doing your homework. Don't ask me for help. I'm going to take a nap before dinner." And, with that, Uncle Shoyuta got up and returned to the house, leaving Tenya to take one last longing look at the pond before following him. I didn't know what to do anymore. Faglin, of course, was a perfect cook. Tenya didn't hesitate to smell the bolognese, but having the lasagna melting in her mouth after the worst days of her life was probably the best gift she had ever received. Faglin had given her a piece of the corner, perfectly crispy and burnt, with the cheese still bubbling, and Tinya couldn't help but feel that she had earned her respect. Perhaps it was because of the English homework. Feiglin had mentioned that he was excellent at assimilating concepts. Or maybe it was the gestures of the hands. Feiglin had followed his erratic movements and flapping wings with a certain gleam of recognition in his eyes, and then dropped down on the ground next to him to help him with his math homework. Not that Tinya really needed help with math, but Feiglin was excellent at it. It was a relief, in a way, to be the one who received help for once. He almost always helped his classmates and rarely received specific tutoring in return. Bakugo had yelled at him a couple of times for ruining an equation, but that was the only help he was getting. Kirishima had assured Tinya that, in Bakugo's language, it meant, "I respect you, and I have noticed that no one helps you as you help others." Tinya didn't know what to say to that. Bakugo was more intuitive than I thought. After dinner, Feiglin had saved a lunchbox for Hisashi's dinner and then 4 more portions for everyone's lunches at school. Tinya had protested, saying that the lunch fever was excellent, but Feiglin had stared at him and Tinya's jaw dropped. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him lunch, even if they were leftovers. Izuku had treated it as normal, and Tinya was under the impression that Feiglin was happy to feed people. It had been a huge lasagna. Feiglin simply shrugged when asked about her, saying that with 5 active men and 1 active male guest, 4 of the 6 being growing teenagers, the leftovers would be a lifesaver. That was a logic Tinya couldn't argue with. The professional heroes ate a lot. Despite his appearance, even Uncle Hisashi had a 6-pack. It was an active job. It was a long day. It dragged on even longer as Tinya went upstairs to take a shower before Uncle Hisashi returned from patrol and came face to face with Feiglin, wrapped in a towel, standing in the hallway with her hand on the doorknob of the office. Tinya froze. Feiglin's hair was wrapped in a towel, set aside, and the scars. Tinya had seen them, but hadn't actually seen them. They were all over her body, perfectly placed, and were painful to look at. Her crop top from before was long-sleeved, and for some reason Tinya hadn't noticed, or even noticed, that they were everywhere. That is, they covered his entire body. He was thin, as Tinya had determined, muscular, conceived for speed and endurance over brute strength. Beautiful was Tinya's first intrusive thought. The second was, now I understand. Why was it so easy to become a criminal? Feiglin was 15 years old, just like him. And those scars were old, at least 5 years, without being allowed to heal completely. Knife wounds, bullet holes, everything paled in comparison to the honeycombs. They were horrible because they were deliberate. That's when Tinya realized that simply, he couldn't ask Feiglin the question that had been running through his head from the moment he typed his name into the search bar. I just couldn't. Feiglin blinked for a moment before smiling. It's okay, he said fondly. They annoy everyone. That's why I cover them with my costume. I'm sorry you had to see it. I can cover them more. No, Tinya exclaimed, and her hands moved, as always, against her will, shaking like mad. No, I don't think there's something that can be hidden. You are beautiful, and you should wear whatever is comfortable for you. I don't feel uncomfortable at all. That was a lie. Tinya was beetroot red, down to the root of her blueberry-colored hair. I was very uncomfortable, but not because of the scars. No, I was uncomfortable because of the freckles. You freckle like a constellation all over your chest and arms, a body made to protect and attack, defined muscles that made your mouth water and your mouth dry at the same time. Bagel. Izuku's voice cut through the chaos, and Tinya's head spun around, eyes wide, waiting to be beaten for tackling Izuku's half-naked brother in the hallway. Feiglin flashed Tinya a beaming smile and opened the bedroom door. Well, that's very kind of you. You're a very good person, Tinya. I like you. Tinya was about to faint when he saw a glimpse of laptops on the desks, more stuffed animals than mattresses on the top bunk, and colored lights along the railings, before the door clicked shut, leaving him alone with Izuku in the hallway. Izuku stared at Tinya, blushing and embarrassed. Tinya was never ashamed. Never, ever. He knew that many of his actions were considered shameful. After all, he was not stupid. But they did not embarrass him, per se. He said what he had to say, when he had to say it. Mom and Dad had instilled it in him since he was a child. It was never a problem to express what he thought or take the reins. If people didn't like it, they didn't like it, But just because you tended to be a little absent-minded didn't mean you should be small. Tenya wasn't in the business of getting small, but right now she wanted to get into a hole and die. Are you? Are you okay? Asked Izuku cautiously. Yes, Tenya exclaimed, before Izuku could finish the question. I'm fine. Don't look at the scars, Izuku said, and Tenya, may the gods help him, giggled before his brain could say no. I stared at the freckles. Izuku stared at him for a second, his eyes narrowing more and more, and Tenya swallowed. The blush did not go down. He has a considerable amount, Tenya concluded weakly, and Izuku continued to stare at him. Yes, it does, Izuku confirmed, and that was the signal for Tenya to enter the shower and pretend that this never happened. Tenya, Izuku said suddenly as Tenya's hand touched the doorknob. The water is not yet heated. She had to wash her hair tonight and put on a mask. It takes a while. Tenya stared at the burnished nickel and swallowed hard for probably a millionth time. I don't care about cold showers. Izuku was watching him, and Tenya had the impression that he was being analyzed. He couldn't ask Izuku, not after having caught him frozen in the hallway, eating his brother with his eyes. Was he looking at him with his eyes? Tenya had no idea. He knew what he looked like when the girls looked at him, when the boys too, but I had never felt the need to look at another person. Once, he vaguely wondered what it would be like to kiss someone, but he found it a bit gross and slimy. Her father had given her the talk before school started, and Tenya had resigned herself to diagrams and detailed explanations on how to put on a condom and use a dental dam. It was learning, and learning was important, but it had never occurred to him that it was an option. He was attractive, and he knew it, but it wasn't much more than that. Was he in love? It was probably too early to tell. After all, he had just met Fagelin, and it was probably the surprise of meeting a delicate boy, for lack of a better term. Sure, he once considered Kaminari's slim build, but those thoughts had been immediately chased away because he was a classmate and was disgusting, even though it was natural. Fagelin could cook and kill Tenya if he wanted to, and boy was that a lot of information to process. You're probably sick of the condolences, Izuku said suddenly, and there was the other life crisis Tenya was going through. He preferred to deal with the apparent gay crisis. They mean well, and I don't want to be ungrateful, Tenya replied coldly, and Izuku watched him intently. Tenya felt as if he had been examined with a magnifying glass. Do you sit with me in the living room while you wait for the water to heat up? Izuku asked suddenly. Yamada won't arrive for another hour or so. I don't want to burden you with my family problems, Tenya protested, and Izuku laughed. Think of it this way. I'm probably the only person your age who has dealt with things like that often, and the way I am is to be a nosy do-gooder who helps others as a coping mechanism. So, realistically, letting you talk about it might help me. And you don't have to pretend. It's harder to talk to the family, isn't it? That was true. It was harder to talk to the family, because Tenya knew deep down that they wouldn't know what to say. He also knew deep down that regardless of how they felt, dealing with him and his feelings would be a burden. Because Tensei was more important right now. The perfect son was broke, and Tenya needed to be perfect instead. Perfect children face things alone. He ignored the calm voice in his head that whispered that Tensei didn't deal with it only when Gauntlet died by his own hand. His feet moved before his mind caught on, following Izuku up the stairs to the couch, where Izuku dropped down and brought his laptop closer to continue working on a playlist he had opened. Tenya's English wasn't the best, but he was pretty sure it was titled Fuck It Up. Was it his patrol list? I was pretty sure I was using an AI, so did I need a playlist? Perhaps it was easier to use it to memorize things. You know, Izuku said, after a pause as he put on a single earbud to listen to music, my first playlist when I turned pro was a collaboration with a retired professional. A singing teacher. He had a vocal quirk, like me, but a seizure shattered his vocal cords. They were rebuilt, but the damage was so severe that he was never able to work with them again. So he became a vocal quirk specialist, with a special emphasis on vocal quirks dangerous to aspiring heroes. The government had him working with me for a year. Is a singing teacher? With shattered vocal cords? Izuku looked at him. He taught young children ASL, American Sign Language, to help them when they were still learning to control their quirks. In a way, he looked a lot like me. His peculiarity worked in a similar way, allowing him to control elements with poetry. However, he had more control. I can't sing without an effect. I have a whole list of safe songs I can sing. You know, people even theorized that I was related to them. How? How does your gift work? Tinya asked awkwardly. He had already explained his own, but Izuku was quick to theorize that All Might was a reserve. Tinya had seen videos of Izuku fighting, and it progressively made less and less sense. Bardic inspiration is molecular manipulation, Izuku explained. In short, it's a little broken, to be honest. And then he laughed with self-loathing as he rubbed the back of his neck. The only real control I can exert over her is to visualize what I want the song to give me. If not, my subconscious simply takes over. The trigger requirement is to sing, but they theorize that I can do even more just by talking if I find a way around the safety mechanism. Although the truth is that I don't want to. In essence, when I sing, I can manipulate atoms to form objects, trigger events, or even influence hormones, depending on the song. When the song ends, the effects fade. So, when I made that gun at the sports festival, I literally made it out of thin air. After all, there is never a shortage of molecules. That was terrifying, really. Tinya blinked a couple of times as she considered the implications. With the right song, it could cause a black hole. In fact, there was an English song, Black Hole Sun, that could literally destroy the planet. It was a lot to live with. In other words, there are limitations. If I do something too big, or something like that, I faint. That's why I only work with small objects in melee work, because my endurance lasts longer. A shotgun is easier to make than, say, a missile attack. I once stampeded foxes and had to leave the patrol early because it left me too exhausted. I once tried to sing a song that caused a hurricane and managed a small squall before my body told me it was too big and knocked me unconscious. But then I sang a song about a normal storm and I managed perfectly. So it depends, really. The advantage is that I don't have to understand the molecular composition for it to work, so it's easier to make things up. It's a very, very broken quirk. It's brilliant. An excellent and versatile gift, Tinya blurted out. Izuku blinked a couple of times before blushing. Thank you. Silence passed for a moment as Izuku played a song in his playlist, thoughtfully tapping the edge of the laptop. Don't think he has no options, Izuku said suddenly. I don't know much about Ingenium, but from what I remember, he's very charismatic. That will take you to many places. His life is not over. You can still save people just by showing up. I don't understand how simply introducing yourself is enough to be a hero, Tinya said cautiously. Of course, his brother's hero career was over. Izuku simply sighed and added another song to the playlist before deciding to speak. I'm willing to bet you investigated, right? Are you and Fagelin interested? Yes. Yes. I was distracted with everything that was going on, so not as much as I should have, but I did investigate them. What's the theme of Mockingjay? Izuku suddenly challenged him, and Tinya drew a blank. What was the theme of Mockingjay? There was not. True. The world is still spinning, Tinya replied quickly, and Izuku leaned forward. I once met a boy my age, when he was a vigilante, Izuku said. He had a peculiarity based on sight, but he lost his eyes when his father attacked him. It was the worst case of child abuse I had ever seen. Fagelin and I began visiting him in his new foster home as often as we could, and Fagelin was the one who discovered that his quirk had actually had a traumatic evolution, much like his own. It was a sensory quirk, the same as Daredevil's, in fact. After losing his sight, it spread to dominate his hearing and smell, even to the point that his body could perceive changes in barometric pressure. We managed to get Daredevil to adopt him. The last time I saw him, he had entered a hero program on recommendation, one of the best in New York. But he wouldn't have noticed if we hadn't stopped showing up, reminding him that his world kept spinning. We didn't need to be heroes on the street for that, saving people from villain attacks, pulling them out of disasters. We just had to talk to a kid who had been through horrible things like us. That's what being a hero is all about. And if Ida can get up and keep talking to people, keep showing the world that she's someone to look up to, because she kept her world moving, and they can too, then her career isn't over. It's just getting started. Tinya was silent for a moment. I had the question on the tip of my tongue. He was about to formulate it, but he did not know how. He always knew how to ask questions. If it's a rude question, please excuse me and tell me. But I have to ask, was it worth it? There he was. He had succeeded. The question I had on the tip of my tongue for the boy who kept the world moving. The question she never dared to ask the boy who made the world a less lonely place. The question that tormented his mind, his dreams, every waking moment. Would it be worth it? He could sneak away to Hosu. He could do it. I wouldn't have his costume, but I could do something. Izuku looked at him with the saddest eyes in the world, and Tenya had a feeling that he wasn't going to get the answer he wanted. Fagelin can't be in the kitchen when someone is cooking, he said suddenly. He can't stand to see someone holding a knife for more than a few minutes. He also doesn't like vaccines. You have to put them on by mouth. IVs make you nervous. He barely managed to stay calm enough for us to leave the hospital. Dad doesn't watch the news when we see it. He changes them to cartoons. We were in a massacre at a preschool a few months ago in Boston. Small bodies broken all over the floor, covered with bloody white sheets until they could be moved. Dad wasn't coming home from the patrol. He slept in the agency for a few hours and returned immediately to Cincinnati, only taking breaks for us to call him and tell him that we were fine. It was a week before we returned home. Mom is drowning in work. He only leaves when we are allowed to return to Ohio. Somehow they make it work, but with us here, I have no idea if the marriage is going to last. And there are some songs I can't hear. I cry. I shut up. I stop hearing things. Fagelin takes hours to shake me out of my depression. And Izuku looked away, his hands suspended over the keyboard. It didn't solve anything. Because Fagelin did it because to the world, zeros didn't matter. They didn't even bury them. They rummaged and pricked the bodies, took samples, studied them like lab rats, and then incinerated them. They did not have a burial. They didn't even allow us to scatter the ashes. I think they threw them away with the trash. We thought it would be different when Aegis came crashing, but they just replaced the zeros with nulls, and the nulls were killed as well. For the heroes, because they couldn't be subdued fast enough. So, I can't really say it was worth it. Dad is in prison. Mom can't even come to see us. We are not even allowed to stay with our grandfather or to be seen in public with him. The world still can't see our faces. And I guess most of all was the look on Faye's face after our last Aegis operation. Izuku fell silent and stared at his laptop, and Tenya found himself hanging on every word. It wasn't there. He wasn't there for days. I think he realized that no matter what he did, it would never end. Because we don't change anything. We only make our lives worse. He was little more than a tool, and I stayed with him because I dared to stand up and say he was human. That's why Dad took him in, because he knew that no one would think he was human enough. And it was always going to be like that. So no, I can't tell you it was worth it. It practically destroyed our family. It destroyed any chance Fagelin had of being normal. It destroyed any chance of me having a normal experience in high school, in America, where I should be worrying about getting my driver's license. No. International scandals. Yes, Grandpa is trying to fix it, but we'll always know. What we did. What we didn't do. What we missed. Mom and Dad can get by. This can bring them closer. But we are not under no illusions. The whole class knows that we are ex-professionals. I hope it will be a week since we start school before our faces go viral. It won't be as bad as in the United States. We are much more than just an internet sensation. But here, we are only a passing phase that will monopolize the news for a few weeks before the country forgets about us. That's really the only advantage of this situation. Tenya was silent, processing Izuku's words as best she could. I hadn't even thought about it, really. How would their parents feel about a dead or imprisoned child because the other was in a wheelchair? How would they react? Would they dance around each other in the kitchen, refusing to look into each other's eyes? Would they pretend everything was fine, or would they collapse? Would Tensei feel relief at the thought of Stain's death, or would he curse himself for being so weak that his brother resorted to murder? He remembered that night that Tensei spent on the ground, the way he was around. For months, Tenya saw him in the crowd. The self-defense classes she signed him up for, the panic whistle she stuffed into her backpack, the way she opened her phone to schedule Tenya's quick calls. She thought of the stares she gave her that never stopped, that slightly forced, but still proud, smile during dinner as Tenya entered the heroism course. Could I do that to them? The answer was no. I should take a shower, Tenya said quietly. Thank you for, explain to me. And then he went upstairs and locked himself in the bathroom. His phone was silent, and he took the time to answer messages. 2 from Achiko, 1 from Tsu, another from Yaoyorozu, and, surprisingly, a message from Kirishima. Tenya had made sure that everyone had his number, but he didn't know that Kirishima would write to him. And then he froze when he saw the last text. Tensei. Tensei. Hey, I heard you were sent to Hizashi's house. Are you okay? I know you don't get along with Toshi. Tenya took a deep breath before writing down her answer. Tenya. Okay. Hitoshi has been pretty nice. If it was completely unbearable, how was he so adept at ignoring things so obviously that he could draw attention to what he ignored? It was a skill he had learned from Uncle Shoyuta, and it wasn't good. The response was almost immediate. Tensei must have been awake and lucid. Tensei, yes? It doesn't seem like it's like him. You don't have to lie, haha. Tenya plucked up the courage as she thought about her answer. He didn't want to burden his brother with his current crisis. A gay crisis was one thing, but a gay crisis involving a former vigilante and former professional hero, a former child soldier, whom Tensei shouldn't even have known was there, was another matter. Tenya, nice in terms of Hitoshi. It can still be quite. Well, it's Hitoshi. We did the homework together. We had lasagna for dinner. Tensei, I hope Shoyuta didn't make it LOL. Tenya, he didn't. The answer came after a second, and Tenya almost choked. Tensei, so how are the Midoriyas? Tenya, I don't know what you mean. They are not in class yet. How? Surely he did not know. Tensei, I heard Shoyuta talking on the phone with mom, brother. He thought she should know before agreeing to let you stay this week. I don't know why she thought she would get hysterical, haha. Tenya, oh. Tensei, well, what are they like? I could use a distraction from being in bed. Tenya wasn't sure how much he should say, but it was Tensei. Tenya, I'd have to check with Uncle Shoyuta before talking about them, but they're nice. Izuku is an artist. Apparently, he painted their suits. And Fagelin is extremely intelligent. He helped me with my homework. She likes makeup, and it cooks very well. He made the lasagna. It was so good that I feared it was a bribe. He gave me the corner room and made us leftovers for tomorrow's lunch. I like him very much. Tensei, well, at least you eat well. I was worried when I learned that Hizashi was going to be at the police station. If Shoyuta had his way, Hizashi's patrol and radio nights would be nothing more than takeout. Tenya, it is preferable to order takeout food than the alternative. No wonder Uncle Shoyuta put too much salt on almost everything. It had gotten better over the years, but it still had its difficult moments. The man prepared about 4 meals well. Hitoshi must have had enough of Thai by now. If he remembered correctly, he had refused to eat it for an entire spring, and Shoyuta only ate about once a season. Although Tenya didn't approve of it, he understood. One could only eat fish a limited number of times a week for breakfast and dinner. Uncle Hizashi had prepared a variety of breakfasts to make up for it. They both felt incredibly proud at the first sign of Hitoshi's rebellion. Tenya couldn't understand it, not really. Not until he heard Uncle Hizashi curse for the first time because of the muzzles, and finally understood those scars on Hitoshi's face that had faded over the years thanks to generous and expensive creams. Then he understood and ignored the rebellion. I wouldn't encourage it, but I could pretend it wasn't happening. Tensei, is that an insult? You and Toshi must get along. Tenya sighed and lowered her head. Tenya, I have to take a shower. Will I be able to write to you tomorrow? Tensei, sure. I should go back to sleep soon, but I wanted to talk to you first. Are you okay? Tenya pondered his answer, long and long. I didn't want to lie, but he was not there. He wasn't there for days. Tenya, I'm better. I should ask you that. Tensei, we are organizing a physiotherapy program. With a little luck, you may also be able to use crutches in a few months or a year. I'll never fully recover. That was left unsaid. Tenya felt her eyes sting, and she ignored him vehemently. I wasn't going to cry. I wouldn't. Tensei, I forgot to mention it. I'm going to be transferred to a hospital in Mustafu to make things easier for mom and dad. They also have a cool physical therapy program. I'll be discharged right away. Tenya cracked a small smile at the statement. Tensei's world would continue to turn. It was Tenya's task to keep it spinning as well. I didn't feel like I could be on par with Tensei, or that I could be a half-decent hero, but maybe I should leave Stain alone. It hurt. It hurt so much to abandon that deep conviction that had settled in his bones over the weekend. But I have no idea if the marriage is going to last. I knew what was happening now. I knew it. It might turn out different. It might look different. But she wanted to do this to take care of her family. And he had to take care of his family. Due to the attack on the sports festival and the cancellation of practices, the week of spring break will be dedicated to building the dormitories and moving all of you for safety reasons. All Might and I will be visiting each of their parents' homes to talk personally about the move, and we hope to have them all installed by Wednesday of next week. And yes, don't rush, the Midoriya will be there. Don't pile them up. Shudo didn't believe it when he heard it. He was leaving the Todoroki house. Fuyumi smiled. Of course, he would have to return on weekends, but he was leaving. He had been invited to move in a day earlier, on Tuesday. Evidently, some students had had the same idea. Shinso was there, practically glaring at anyone who approached the third floor. Apparently, Aizawa had put him on guard. Bakugo was there, also on the third floor, which left 2 other rooms. It wasn't hard to guess who was there. Bakugo knew them. Tokoyami and Shudo hadn't said a word about it. It was nobody's business, and overwhelming Bakugo was simply looking for damage to UA property, so they had mutually decided, for the mental health of the class, that no one needed to know until it was known. Surprisingly, Shinso and Bakugo had let Ida in to help them, once she was done with her room. Shudo wasn't going to give importance to that, nor how Shinso knew them, although he desperately wanted to do so. Well, he wasn't going to do it, but he did. The Midoriya were not with Nizu. That had become clear after the accusations, and they had gone with Aizawa. Enji, predictably, had been late to pick him up, so he knew that they had left with Aizawa. So he was pretty sure of his theory that Shinso was his son. Now, all that remained was to prove that he was married to All Might or Present Mike. It was only a matter of time. Even so, Shudo had his own job to do. Specifically, completely redecorate your room with tatami mats to be able to sleep. It had taken him hours, but he finally smelled the smell of food below. He didn't recognize the smell at all, but his nose told him to sit up and smell it, despite how dirty it was. Who cooked? He didn't know that any of his classmates knew how to cook, and he bet that Aizawa was incapable. His research led him to the common area, where the TV was on as the sun set through the large windows of the bedroom. Wow. So the Midoriya had moved in today. Again, true. He was a genius. Izuku was sitting on the couch with an acoustic guitar in his hands, absent-mindedly playing a few notes as he stared at a tablet on the coffee table, giving away. Were those? It wasn't music, but it seemed related to it. He bit his lower lip as he looked at her, playing the same chords over and over again with different strumming patterns, as if trying to decipher them. Midoriya? Shudo called hesitantly, and the green-haired boy looked up with a very big blink. True. Shudo had forgotten that it was pretty. Todoroki, right? Midoriya asked softly, her fingers still restlessly running along the strings. Yes. Wow. Hitoshi didn't say you moved today, Midoriya said, looking back at the tablet in front of him. Are you done? Yes, I did it. You were pretty quiet at the station. You too, Todoroki replied. I didn't know what to do. The TV was on. They never watched TV at home. It was just there. Was it a caricature? I didn't have much to say, Midoriya replied in a weak voice as she tried another chord before dropping an explanation in English and opening a new tab to go to Spotify to find something. A sad acoustic pluck sounded through the metal speakers, and the singer began to chirp something in English. He had a pleasant voice. It was kind of a rough tenor, but Shudo didn't quite understand the lyrics. I really needed to pay more attention to English. There it is, Midoriya muttered before intervening just as the guitar grew more animated. He didn't sing, but it seemed to Shudo that he wanted to. Shudo didn't know what to do. Midoriya seemed to be completely absorbed in what he was doing. And to begin with, he wasn't much of a talker, but it was quite nice to see Lichtenberg's marked fingers dancing on the guitar strings. Shudo had never seen anyone play guitar in person. He had only seen Fuyumi practice the flute, on the rare occasions when he left his room to see if his brothers were alive. She was good at it. Faye, you have to. Well, you know what? It doesn't matter, you do it. Bakugo's voice was unmistakable, filtering from the kitchen, catching Shudo's attention. He was reluctant to leave, but Midoriya was clearly busy. And so, Shudo headed to the kitchen, where Ida and Shinso were sitting at the counter watching the chaos. He was pretty sure that Uraraka had moved in today, and Azui too, but the girls hadn't come down yet. They probably didn't even know that the Midoriya were there. The other Midoriya stood there, carefully ignoring Bakugo as he tossed a good amount of minced asparagus that reeked of garlic into a pan. Bakugo was frowning, probably annoyed that Midoriya didn't use a spatula. They are not going to turn around just like that, but Bakugo protested. They will survive. I need you to mash the potatoes, Midoriya said, and it was going to get very confusing. Cream and butter, please. No milk. You make a great curry. Your American food is not good. My American food is great, you. Midoriya turned and blinked towards Bakugo vaguely. Stop swearing, he said dryly. I wasn't that hard. Bakugo glared at him, and Shudo braced himself for an explosion. It did not happen. Instead, Bakugo gave up with a low growl and went back to the other pot, scooping it up with oven mitts and pouring the contents into a colander. Bright yellow potatoes, the likes of which Shudo had never seen, fell into the colander, and he poured them again at once before taking a small container of cream and pouring it all over it, immediately adding more butter than allowed. True, Americans, they like butter. Bakugo began to mash, adding salt and what looked like white pepper to the mixture, while Midoriya finished turning the asparagus and opened the oven. At that moment, Shudo located the scent he had been detecting. Chicken, roast chicken. Midoriya put on some gloves and pulled out 2 pans, one with 2 chickens butterflied open and the other with a third, before placing them on mats on the counter to cool. This was very American. That's when Midoriya finally noticed that Shudo was standing there, and his face just lit up. Todoroki, Hitoshi didn't tell me you were moving today? He exclaimed enthusiastically. Izuku, look, it's Todoroki. I saw it, shouted the other Midoriya from the common room. And, for God's sake, this was too confusing. I would have to call them by their names. He seemed busy, Shudo said awkwardly. I didn't know how to react to this. He lived with other people his age. I barely knew how to interact with them on a daily basis. He had barely finished learning the names of his classmates, and now there were 2 more, though they were technically more active as class aides than students, given the clues of what their schedules would be like. Can I call them by their first names? Shudo asked bluntly. Surnames are confusing. Of course, Fagelin replied cheerfully, and oh, he was a lot more talkative than Shudo remembered. There was a presence behind him, and then Izuku was there, smiling brightly at Shudo. We don't care about anything, he said, just as intensely, and Shudo blinked a couple of times. Intense. Very intense. It couldn't be genetic. Fagelin was adopted. Almost circumstantial. Izuku was more naive. Look at the asparagus, bagel, Bakugo said, and reached over Fagelin to pick up an asparagus and put it in his mouth. They are ready. Why would you tell me to check them out and then do it yourself? Fagelin asked and blinked a couple of times. Because you were going to distract yourself and not do it, Bakugo replied and turned off the burners. Are you going to cut the chicken? Let it sit, or we'll lose all the juice. Yes, it doesn't matter, Bakugo said, and pushed Shudo to drop down on the counter. Hey, class representative. Go do the class representative thing and bring the girls and the brainless man to dinner. Of course, I'll bring them in right away. Ida shouted and disappeared instantly. What speed quirks? They were all very rare. So Bakugo still refused to acknowledge Shudo's existence. I'm glad to hear that. Was Tokoyami here? Oh. They had moved in Bakugo, who apparently considered the Midoriya his brothers, Shinso, who he was sure lived with him until now, Ida, who had disappeared with Shinso last Monday, and continued to appear in class at the same time as him for the past week, Shudo, who had already met them once, Tokoyami, who had also met them once, Azui, one of the most sensible girls, and Uraraka, one of the girls who were easiest to get along with, all on the same day. They were getting used to being around them. It should have been obvious. Izuku tilted his head towards Shudo in consideration. Your gift is interesting. Why do people keep calling it a rare dual gift? Izuku asked suddenly, and Shudo stared at him. Because it is? No, it's not, Izuku said with a beaming smile. If it was a dual gift, you wouldn't have been able to melt the kid on the ribbon of that glacier without fire. Huh. Shudo admitted that he was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but what? They are not two peculiarities, Izuku said lazily. It is only one. Specifically, the manipulation of temperature. Their sides have different temperatures, right? They heat the air molecules to the point of combustion and cool them enough for the water molecules to freeze. Has no one ever told you that they are not two peculiarities? Shudo looked at him blinking for a few seconds and had the impression that it was the first time he had seen him. Sure, I'd seen it twice before, but this was the first time for real. Izuku, you can't go around re-diagnosing quirks, Shinso said softly, as if Izuku hadn't given Shudo an identity crisis that rivaled that villain's twice. I'm sorry, did you just say that I only have a gift? Asked Shudo in disbelief, and Izuku squinted at him. How come your father is hero number 2 and hasn't given you an accurate diagnosis yet? Did it take you to a scrapyard or something? It is temperature manipulation. How are you supposed to use your gift to the fullest if you don't even know what it is? Shudo was speechless. While he didn't talk much, he was completely stunned. For a moment, he wanted to challenge Izuku, demanding that he tell him what made him believe he was the Dawn expert, but then he remembered that he was, in fact, an ex-professional and that much of his life had revolved around accurately determining someone's gift in order to effectively eliminate it. Wait, did this mean that he had used his fire, technically, at the sports festival? Did he count on him using it after winning? Wait, if it was a gift, was he using his father's from the beginning, or had he never used it? Enji produced flames and manipulated them. Shudo, technically, didn't produce them at all. Or is it? Did combustion produce them? Enji's gift expelled gas from his skin that he himself ignited. If Izuku was right, Shudo didn't produce any gas. What? Had you just moved house and was already going through an identity crisis? How is that possible? Izuku was looking at him again. Are you? It's not such a rare rarity. It can't be weirder than miraculously producing fire and ice without any scientific reason. I mean, look at me. I sing and I really rebuild molecules. How strange. No one can understand